You're actually a really cool guy, for those who don't know.
Well, I'm not really sure what to say to that, to be honest.
Congratulations. I just saw Chimamanda Adichie giving you a shout out on your book, The Jungle.
It's good for my ego. That hopefully good for the book sales as well.
Most definitely. Tell us a bit about the book.
Right. So the book is essentially what is known as an anthology. Right. It's like a compendium of some of my biggest stories between 2019 and 2021. So it's kind of telling a story of my own career over that period, using those stories as a storytelling device. So the name of the book is The Jungle, a personal journey with the enfant terrible of Nigerian journalism. And why it has that name and why the book is structured that way is to tell essentially a story of just how lawless a society Nigeria actually is, and the sort of equal sort of madness that you need to have, whether as a journalist or as a social crusader or politician, whatever you are, to be able to combat that craziness that is sort of inbuilt into Nigerian society. So it was officially released January 31 this year. It's published by Abibiman Publishing. It's available worldwide actually. So for readers in Nigeria, it's available on at Roving Heights, which is a nationwide bookstore in Nigeria. Outside of Nigeria, it's available on Amazon. It's available on Walmart.com. It's available at Barnes and Noble, and it's available at American Book Warehouse. Yeah.
That was your first book, and it seems like it has received quite a recognition.
Yes, it has. With good reason. I mean, they're not. So if you've seen the cover of the book, I don't know if you have a copy. That's a shame. I should probably send one to you the next time I'm in Tanzania. But if you see the cover of the book, there's a comment from Onyeka Onwelewe, and he tagged me Africa's Roberto Saviano. Now, if you know who Roberto Saviano is, he's the guy who wrote Gomorrah, which is the book that essentially told the story of the Neapolitan mafia in Naples. And he's a guy who has lived under police protection since 2006. So that's who Roberto Saviano is. The TV series Gomorrah is based on that book. So um, that book basically is it's like the goal of the book wasn't necessarily to cast me in that light, but inevitably those comparisons will be made because I mean the kind of craziness described in the book, the stories that are told in the book are way crazier than anything Roberto Saviano ever encountered in his life. I mean, you have an Al Qaeda sympathizer, who is sitting on the federal cabinet and nobody knows who he is. And then here comes this crazy journalist who just rips the mask off this guy and says, "Hey, everybody, you've got a terrorist on the federal cabinet." That was fun. Not really. You've got stories like the Polish entrepreneur who came to Nigeria and misrepresented himself as some sort of tech genius. Basically defrauded a bunch of Nigerian investors, ran away, and then went around the world selling a story of how Nigerian investors tried to ruin his life and tried to kill him, and how there was this Nigerian godfather who set Interpol after him. Just sold this huge ball of absolute bullshit, made it into a TED Talk, which has like 2 million views on YouTube, made it into a book, which he claims is a bestseller. It was nothing of the sort. The lies went around the world twice, and then here came this guy to basically once again, rip the veil of the actual story. And then, obviously he was very displeased after the story was put out because basically everything that he obtained in Africa off the back of that story that he went around telling, he lost everything. All his board appointments, everything, everybody. He lost absolutely everything. So he tried to sue me in Nigeria, which is very instructive because everyone knows that my corporate address is in Wyoming. I can easily be sued in the US at any time. But he intentionally didn't want to sue me in an actual court. So he instead went to Nigeria to sue me there because he knows that anything is possible in Nigeria. And he didn't even sue me for defamation, which is what you're supposed to do if someone libels you. He didn't do that. Instead, he went with some tangential argument about how he wasn't given enough time to respond. So, the fact that he wasn't given enough time to respond means that there was an intent to defame. It was just total bullshit. And after like 4 years in court, he didn't get anywhere. Then the court recommended alternative dispute resolution. We went to ADR in Lagos. I actually attended the session online. And so the first session, there was an agreement that was made in my absence. The second session, when I came, because it was myself and the platform that published the story, Newswire, that were sued. The second session, I was present, and we're all there, and the judge basically said something completely different to what she said in the first session, basically told a lie, right? Which, again, in Nigeria, everything is possible. It was very glaringly obvious that the judge had me bribed. It was the most ridiculous thing ever. And I pulled out. I told them to go fuck themselves. So that's the kind of dramatic situation that I found myself in over the past 4 to 5 years, which is some of which is what is covered in the book. I should also mention that the follow-up is actually coming out early next year, right? So the title of the book, I'm being careful to put out the title. I'm deciding whether to put out the title or not, because the publisher hasn't actually sort of signed off on it yet. But the working title that we're currently working with is Breaking Point, a Nigerian journalist's quest for salvation in times of chaos. That's the working title. And what that book is going to do is go even into deeper detail than The Jungle. The Jungle, which is basically just an anthology. This next one is also, it also has some of the stories that I've done since between 2021 and now, but it also has chapters which are not stories that anyone has seen before, like completely original stuff from my personal life. So for the first time, stories about exactly what I have been up to over the past few years when I've, since I left Nigeria, when I've been in exile, the crazy adventures that I got up to during that time, a failed marriage during that time, which I guess most people watching this will be shocked. Oh my God! So you're on, divorce number 2? Yeah, that happened. So that's your exclusive.
Exclusive,
yeah.
right there.
Also, it's basically yeah. That's what that book is. I think it's the most difficult thing I've ever had to write. Simply, partly because there's just so much that had to be fit in. There's a lot, how I got into a safe house, my relationship with Anas, Aramaya Anas in Ghana, back and forth with the Ghanaian government, then the whole brouhaha that happened in January when I went to Cambridge, and what happened with Oxford and all that BS. There's just a lot, and I guess what also makes it a bit difficult is that the book isn't even. I have the outline, which I've submitted to the publisher, and I'm already drafting. However, there's a part of me that feels like the book isn't actually finished yet, because there are things which are still happening, which potentially might need. So which is why the initial working date for handing in the manuscript was October, but I've pushed that to December now, because there's just so much going on. So yeah, that's as far as me and books go for now.
About relationships, how was your experience before becoming the David Ureni that people know, the celebrity? How was your relationship
Don't use
like
that word,
before?
Don't use that word.
Which one, celebrity?
Yeah, please don't do that.
Why not?
don't do that.
But you are.
No, don't do that, please.
You have influence.
Yeah. Well, I stay away from using terms like celebrity. It's inviting trouble.
Oh, I see. But how was your relationship like before people knew you as the investigative journalist that you are, and after?
So prior to becoming this thing now, the truth is, to an extent, there's always been an element of. So I come from a sort of a fairly privileged background. So there's always been a bit, especially, I'm speaking of my experience in Nigeria. When I was outside of Nigeria, like when I was in the UK, it was a bit different. But since I returned to Nigeria in 2013, there was always a bit of an element of, it's not quite as pronounced as it is now. But even at that time, there was a bit of an element of people making judgments based on what they thought they saw, right? What was perceived to be behind me. So, I mean, part of the reason why my first marriage, for example, didn't really work out in the long run was, um, obviously, apart from the fact that we were both very young. Like when we got married, I was 25, she was 22. I don't know what the hell we thought we were doing. I don't know how, in which universe a 22-year-old and a 25-year-old get married. That just wasn't a very smart idea, and it happened. But apart from that, there was also the thing of people have expectations based on who your parents are, based on what background you're coming from, based on your context. And then they get into this thing with you, and then they realize it's not really that simple. Like, okay, this guy might come from XYZ background, but it doesn't mean he identifies with it, first of all. There's complications, there's religious differences, there's personality clashes, there's also the whole Cinderella story doesn't really work out very well. That was the case on more than one occasion, actually. In addition to the marriage, that happened again after the marriage. People, it was an issue. But overall, I would say the main difference in how romantic partners related with me prior to me becoming a sort of known person and after was that I think afterward it became more a case of me having to become more selective. I think before, and I'm trying to phrase this in a way that isn't gonna get a bunch of people, jumping down my throat on Twitter. But I think before it was more a case of um, me kind of having to prove this, that, or the other, you know. But I think humans, I don't think this is a female thing. I think it's just a human thing. Humans have a funny way of reacting to people when they think people are in a position of power, be it fame, be it wealth, be it whatever it is. People react differently to you when they feel that you're in a sort of verified position. Because afterward, it became more a case of me kind of having to sort of almost fend people off. Yeah. So previously, if I wanted to maybe go on a date with someone, I'd sort of, you know, speak to them for a week or two, and then the whole, send a risky text and then bite your fingernails and wonder, okay, is this going to happen? Is this not going to happen? Afterward, it became more a case of, I think I actually mentioned this to you earlier this morning that I can't think of a time, certainly between 2019 and maybe even this year, where I actually like asked someone to go out on a date or something, because that never needed to happen. It was sort of coming in the opposite direction, and I kind of had to be the one, you know, being the gatekeeper, and either saying, okay, yes, let's do this, or hey, I'm with someone, so that kind of, so I think that's the main difference. And well, the other difference, which is not so light, this is a much darker thing, is um for the first time I had to start thinking about the potential for whether this is going to end well for them based on being associated with me. So for the first time, it's not just a case of, oh, I like this person, let's have an adventure. For the first time, it became a case of, in the long run, am I good for you? Can you handle the craziness that I have to deal with? Can you handle the fact that, and there was a period where at every point in time, I had an overnight bag packed. So permanently, I had an overnight bag packed with my most important documents inside it.
Emergency bag.
Yeah. So if at any point in time I need to leave the country, I can just skip and be out of the country in 2 hours. Like, I had an emergency fund. I could just literally book a ticket and skip at any time. So can you deal with that kind of eventuality? Can you deal with, not being able to post me on Instagram, not being able to tell your friends who you're with and where you are and all that kind of stuff? Because that also became an issue. So yeah, those were the major issues. I think that were the differences before and after.
do you have I don't suppose you also have the freedom that you had before, like the freedom of just being able to walk around and not to worry about anyone knowing you or seeing you or what's gonna happen.
No, I absolutely do not. Um, it's I've always even after leaving Nigeria and all that, I initially had the idea that look, I am I have a generic face. I'm not a very recognizable person facially. I'll just I'll be fine. I always had that idea initially, and it took a while actually for me to realize that actually no, you're not gonna be fine. And you're not as generic as you think you are, and you're not as invisible as you think you are. Just because you're not in Nigeria doesn't necessarily mean that you're safe. I mean, you saw the whole Zimbabwe debacle, I'm sure. Part of the reason that happened, I was going there for a reason. I had an event, right? But if I had genuinely had any idea that the Zimbabwean authorities knew who I was, I probably wouldn't even have gone. But I have this idea in my head. Look, outside of West Africa, who the hell knows who David Hundeyin is? So whatever, I'm fine. I traveled around Africa a lot, like a whole lot. I mean, Ethiopian Airways specifically. Those, I mean, I think one of my big regrets over the past 2 years is that I don't have frequent flyer miles because I think I should have earned a couple of free flights by now. Like I've traveled around Africa so much, and no one ever recognizes me. So I've always had the idea that I'm fine, but especially of recent, the walls are sort of closing in. Like even outside of West Africa, I'm becoming a known face now, and more importantly, a known entity to nation states outside West Africa. And anytime I get into a country, the government is aware. The government is always aware. Like I've become a person of interest now. That's not necessarily a good thing. I have to be extra careful. If I want to tweet something, I have to like triple filter it. This thing is it gonna piss off some government somewhere? Previously, like I used to talk reckless. I just go and tweet something about, I don't know, Kagame or something. I don't do that anymore. We have to be a lot more careful now. You have to be a lot more guarded because everybody knows who you are now, and um, anything can and will be used against you. You know, um, I think this was just last month actually. So this was shortly after the whole Zimbabwe debacle, when this thing about Nigeria potentially going to war with Niger became a thing, and then the Nigerian president tried to illegally deploy special forces into Niger, which would have basically started the war. And the attack plans were leaked to me, right? And the people who leaked it knew why they chose me because they knew I'd put it out, right? And I did, and that stopped that invasion. I basically stopped the war. However, the backlash that came from that was incredible. It was beyond what you might imagine. So prior to the Zimbabwe thing, I guess the Nigerian authorities didn't really know how I had been traveling around the world because I wasn't using a Nigerian passport. I guess they were wondering how. Is he moving illegally? How is he doing it? After the Zimbabwe thing, because Nick Mangwana, the permanent secretary in Zimbabwe's Ministry of Information, put out my business on Twitter and told the whole world I'm traveling with Ghanaian papers. So now they knew that I had a Ghanaian passport. So they knew that potentially the Ghanaian government, had some kind of a hold on me or something. So after that happened, they wrote a letter to the Ghanaian government, basically asking them to hand me over. Yeah, they wrote a letter to the Ghanaian government. I was actually informed, I don't know how true this is, but I was actually informed that they dispatched a plane to Accra to get me. I mean, I wasn't in the country. I mean, because ever since the Zimbabwe thing happened, I knew that I couldn't be in Ghana. It didn't make sense anymore. But I guess they weren't to know that. They sent a letter to the Ghanaian government, and they apparently, I don't know how true it is, but they actually sent a plane. I think it's called the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA. It's a military intelligence thing. They apparently sent a plane to Accra to basically illegally render me to Nigeria. I don't think the Ghanaians had their time. I think they were knocked back, but I mean, regardless, I wasn't in the country to find out. You understand? Because I don't believe in waiting to find out. I believe in being proactive. So I wasn't around in the first place to deal with that nonsense. But that's just an example of how just personal freedom has been lost to a very large extent, has been very curtailed. Right. So there's just I don't go out a lot. I do a lot of I take it. The other day, my my girlfriend sent me a meme, and it was like a stick man, and he's like he's looking like he's I don't know if you watched the movie Jumanji, right? Some guy gets trapped in a Ouija board, and he comes out 33 years later. He's been in the jungle, and he comes out looking awful, Jim Carrey, right? So the stick man is looking like that, and the text on the meme is, when you haven't left the house in weeks and you just take deliveries. And she said, "That's you," because apparently that's what I look like now. Normally, you know, my beard would be all sharp. I go for a haircut once every 3 days, but I'm sure you can see how I look now. I don't leave the house. I don't leave the house. So that's the unfortunate reality of the choices that I've made, I guess. I'm not complaining. Nobody forced me to do this, but here we are.
Your story sounds like a movie.
Sometimes I can hardly believe it myself. Sometimes there was a day, I think this was last week. I woke up and for like 10 seconds I was completely disoriented. I didn't recognize where I was. I didn't know anything. I actually panicked for a second. Then I thought, oh, right. This is my bedroom. This is my apartment. I'm in so and so city. Oh, right. So I had to sort of build a mental picture of how I got here. Because I've moved around so much. I've done so much moving around. Like the number of cities where I either maintain an apartment or I have a regular Airbnb that I roll through. It's sometimes I think, well, this is why I think last time we spoke, I mentioned to you that this is the career you do 4, 5, 6 years, and then you retire. This isn't something you do for a lifetime. It's like I can't imagine myself being like 40 and having to do this. I really can't imagine it. I have a colleague. I mean, I'm not going to mention his name. I'm going to mention his name in the book because I've taken his permission, but I'm not going to mention his name now. But I have a senior colleague who was very useful to me when I was in Ghana. He's a Nigerian, right? He's a journalist. He's an investigative journalist as well, much older than I am. He was very useful to me. He's my mentor. He's like my big brother almost. And I mean, I love him to death. I respect him a lot. He's one of the most important people in my life. However, I can't imagine being his age and doing that kind of stuff. I just kind of picture, no. So, this movie, as you called it, I think we're in the final act or close to the final act because, another year or two, I think it'll be time to hand over the baton to a younger person. I'm no spring chicken myself. I mean, 33 might not sound that old, but when you've been doing this for the period that I have, it starts to weigh on you.
I think people are gonna miss you.
Well, I don't know what to say to that.
What do you think you're gonna be doing after?
To be honest with you, I think I'm always going to be in the ecosystem. I don't think I'm ever at this point. I don't think I'm ever going to,
completely be out of it.
Be an accountant, become an accountant, and work 9 to 5 in some back office somewhere. I don't think that's feasible. I don't think that's ever going to happen at this point. I think a certain Rubicon has been crossed. Whether I like it or not, I'm always going to be in the public eye in some form or the other. So I think I am going to be in the media ecosystem in some form. However, hopping from plane to plane, investigating stories across borders, pissing off powerful people in governments across the continent, all that kind of stuff that I've been doing for years. Nah, it's something it's a young person's game. Like the older you get, the more it just becomes like, come on, like at this point I'm thinking about kids, I have a serious girlfriend, a settled relationship. There are other things to worry about now. So it's like I'm not saying that like I'm retiring tomorrow. That's not the case. That's definitely not the case. However, we are getting to the end of the cycle, and I think it's like when you're a professional footballer and you're 33. You know that you still have it in you. You can still play. However, you also know that another 2-3 years, your legs are gonna be gone. I see it in a similar way. Like you know that you're getting to the end of your prime, so it's time to pack it in.
I assume that a lot of young people who want to be journalists will be looking up to you as someone who they would want to emulate. And in that sense, I suppose that young people walk up to you and go like, "Hey, I want to be a journalist. Can I do work with you? Or can I write for West Africa Weekly?" And I mean, some of them could be individuals who are like really serious about it, but I suppose most of them are not, because apparently that is how things work. But is it something you have considered in terms of, grooming young people who are gonna take up your space when you step down?
So first of all, regarding people walking up to me or sending me messages and being like, "Oh, I want to be featured on West African Weekly. I want to write a story on your platform." Um, that's kind of not how it works. Yeah, people do make those requests, but I wish they understood that um I as you rightly said, prior to when we had this recording, I actually have a lot of respect for my audience. So I have built this audience brick by brick, hand over fist over the years, and they've come to expect a certain level of quality with anything that has my name on it. So before I'm going to put my name on something and send it to my audience, I'm going to be 100% sure that it meets those quality standards. So it's not going to be some, with all due respect, some 22-year-old kid who doesn't have any bylines. And like the first place they want to start building bylines is West Africa Weekly. That's not how it works. I kissed a lot of frogs in my time. It sounds very cliche, but there are no elevators. You have to use the stairs, and you have to earn your stripes. Especially in this field, you can't hide. You can't you can't so maybe if you're a footballer, maybe it's possible that you can just be in a good team and you get carried by your good teammates. This is a purely individual thing where you will get ruthlessly exposed if there's any quality deficiency. So there's no room for passengers, unfortunately. So if I'm at this level, everyone I'm working with has to be at the exact same level. That's why I don't hire people.
No compromises.
That's why I don't hire people. Everything is on me. It's not because I couldn't use the help, but it's because the few experiences that I've had, we try to work with people, it's always a nightmare. If they're not missing deadlines, then there's quality issues, and this isn't just about the writing. This is even I've had issues with production where like a documentary is coming out and like I'm like this is maybe 2 days to release date and I'm like there's an entire section that has to be redone. And it's always something, maybe there's a picture that is supposed to be used and the wrong picture was used. And there's no reason for the wrong picture to have been used. It's just the person just didn't, just that little extra bit of effort, you know? So, and I'll give you a practical example. So, in my very first documentary, which was about the documentary version of Conflicts for Jihad, the Boko Haram origin story, in the final version that came out, there's a segment which I actually had to use. I actually had to blur on YouTube Studio because one of the images that was used. So the voiceover was talking about Abdusalam Abubakar, who is one person, and the image that was used was that of what's his name now? He's an NDLA chairman, Abuba Marwa, who is a completely different person who looks nothing like the first guy. And really, all it would have taken is just that little bit of effort. So what I suspect happened is the editor I was working with would have Googled what's the name Abdusalam Abubakar, and maybe Buba Marwa's picture came up because it was in a related article, and the person didn't bother to maybe like click on Google Images and see who the vast majority of the results belong to. He just clicked on the first thing and just saved it, and yeah, that went into the documentary. And I didn't notice it until after it had gone out. And then I started getting negative comments on YouTube, because it's you're putting out a journalistic documentary and then there's like a wrong picture.
That's
You're
bad.
potentially compromising the quality of the entire thing. So these are the issues. I had to blur it. So nowadays I find myself being extremely careful with who I allow to be on my platform. I have since Genesis, there are only 3 people whom I have allowed to have a byline on West Africa Weekly. Just 3 people. One of them, I'm not going to mention her name. She works with TRT, which is the Turkish state-owned broadcaster. She's an international level journalist. Second one, his name is Ibanga Isine. He used to work with Leadership, Premium Times, Punch newspaper. He's way older than me. He's a senior colleague, and he was CNN 2015 African Journalist of the Year. Distinguished journalist. The third, Oladele Owodina, he was a senior news editor at Newswire. We've worked together before. That's how come I trust him to be on my platform. So just 3 in 3 years. That's not by accident, right? Because I need to be sure that you can deliver a certain level of quality before I co-sign you, before I put you on my platform, before I deliver you to my audience, because I respect my audience. But over and above that, the wider question of am I trying to put together some sort of legacy building process to train people potentially? Well, I get asked this question all the time, and right now it's I would say it's not necessarily my priority, because I had this conversation last year with one of these NGOs whose names I won't mention. They actually reached out to me. I didn't reach out to them, and they had a managerial clear out recently. And the new guy is a Cameroonian guy. He reached out to me. He said he loves my work. He loves how I do it. Africa needs voices like mine, and they want me to train a new generation of West and Central African journalists. And I should put together a training program and a training proposal, all of that stuff. So I put together a very solid training program, which didn't just have me on the facilitation team. It had people like Ibanga Isine, had Anas Arameyaw Anas from Ghana, had people from Senozo, which is a West African journalism. It was an excellent program and proposal. And then I sent in a proposal, and it was like, oh, budget is huge. It's like, well, yeah, quality costs money.
What are you expecting?
Yeah, so it's a thing of people look at what you're doing with like a shoestring budget, and instead of looking for ways to enhance what you're doing and to help you, they rather want you to do more with that same shoestring budget. That's just how it is. And unfortunately, that's not how it works. What I'm doing is already to an extent, is already like a labor of love. I'm not trying to die young. So, whoever can help, honestly. So at this point, I think my contribution to humanity, if you like, will be to keep West Africa Weekly running, even in my absence, right? Because I think a time is coming rapidly coming actually, when I'm not going to be running it on a day-to-day basis, and it needs to function the same way it functions now without me. So I need to put a team in place that's going to make that possible. I took in some investments earlier this year. I'm hoping to take in some more investments in the coming few months and weeks. Fingers crossed on that. And yeah, so that's what I think my legacy will be. It will be that West Africa Weekly, which is a completely new form of media in the African media space. Like, it simply doesn't exist outside the West Africa Weekly. That will be institutionalized, right? That's obviously, it's easier said than done to an extent, because while it's possible to train people to research at the level you do, it's possible to train people to write at the level you do, it's possible to train people to produce videos, to do all of these things that I do. But what is not really possible to do is teach people integrity. Because integrity is almost like an emotional decision. You can't teach it. They either have it or they don't. So like in my case, I'm very I think I'm very open about the fact that the background that I come from makes it possible for me to do my work in the ways that I do it. When somebody wafts $100,000 under my nose, I'm not going to lose my mind.
By the way, which they have done.
I will mention no names, but this unspecified they have done. I'll mention other names, in the course of this, but I'm not going to lose my mind, because, at risk of sounding conceited, I've seen multiples of that before, and even as I am right now, I live pretty well. I'm not poor. So it's like, I don't need you. I don't need your money. So I'm good, right? But if you're if you're talking about people who come from the country which is ranked as the world's poverty capital, a country that has more people living in extreme poverty than even India, despite having like 1/6 of India's total population, then are you really going to tell those people, hey, be like me?
If you get once in a lifetime opportunity,
Yeah, this thing which could change you and your family's existence, don't take it because it's not the right thing to do. Yes, it's not the right thing to do, but I'm also realistic enough to know that
oh yeah,
they might tell me yes, and then behind my back it's gonna be like, sure, sure,
I'm
Jan.
waiting for it.
Exactly. So again, that's why I'm being very cautious about sort of just bringing people in and potentially diluting my platform. I don't want that to happen. I don't think West Africa Weekly is the first publication to start with the intentions that I have. I think we, even in Nigeria, as recently as 2009, there was a newspaper called 234 Next. Now, obviously, there were some people behind 234 Next whom I believe always had their own ulterior motives. These were just not good people. But the stated mission of that newspaper at the time was to deliver like impartial, was basically what West Africa Weekly is, but in a daily format. But once you bring in people, everything gets diluted. And it might surprise you to know some of the people who were on the staff of 234 Next at the time, they are the people who are sort of in and around power now, who are saying all the stupid things that you hear. So you might know a guy called Tolu Ogunlesi, who was the spokesperson to President Buhari, who just left office. He was on 234 Next. He once had a reputation as some sort of crusading journalist too, until he got access to power and showed who he really is. So you can't train for that. You can't legislate for that. People will be who people are. So for now, I'm being very cautious about potentially inviting anyone in so that they can write on my name and then potentially disappoint me. I don't want to do that. I'm being very cautious. But I will have to find a way eventually, because the platform has to outlive me. And I'm getting, I'm 33, so I'm not an old man. But at the same time, my priorities in life are shifting a bit. So I'm not always going to be present the way I am. To work 15 hours a day to do something, that's not feasible. So I will have to figure it out.
And I think it's more than just getting people who have integrity. I mean, I think people underestimate the effort that you put in, they underestimate the struggles that you go through, they underestimate the times that you'd pour your blood and your life into the work that you're doing, and then after it's out, just people go like, oh cool, and then leave it, nothing happens. But I think at the same time, it's also good to understand that the impact you're making is really massive. I mean, the fact that your publication helped stop a war between Nigeria and Niger, I mean, that's massive, right? It's easy to celebrate that and appreciate it, right? But the question is, how many people will be willing to put in the effort that is required for you to be able to achieve what you've just achieved? I mean, even the life that you're living, I mean, how many people can become public faces and at the same time not being seen in public?
Exactly. Are you prepared to live as a ghost the way I do? Are you prepared to take on the amount of risk that, because I have a huge risk appetite, right? Are you prepared to do that? One of the issues I have is I get loads of whistleblowers who want to give me half information. They don't want to give me the full thing. Because even though the full thing could prove the story beyond any reasonable doubt, they are so terrified. They're all scared. Like, fear is a default state of being, I think, across our continent. So when I come across people like that, it's already a struggle just to convince them that, hey, I'm the one taking on the risk here. I'm the one taking on the risk of like being sued or whatever. So all you have to do is just hand this over, and you're anonymous. No one knows who you are. But even that is a struggle. So imagine being the person who is actually taking on all that risk. Now, the number of times I've been threatened with a lawsuit, I think I've lost count. I think last time we spoke, I said it was 14. It's more than that now. I think only one of them has actually tried to take it to court. I think I mentioned earlier that was Marek, the Polish guy. But beyond that, but most people, once they just see that letter with the NBA seal and the letterhead, their bladder starts to leak. Oh my God, I'm at risk of getting sued. And, So not everyone can do this. Not everyone can look the eyes that I look in every day and say, I'm not afraid of you.
Mm.
Not everyone can do that. Not everyone sees the bigger picture. Let me just put it that way, because there is a bigger picture. The bigger picture is that Nigeria, and to a lesser extent West Africa and Africa in general, is the way it is because um, the relatively tiny number of people who are in charge, basically, they don't get checked. Right? It's been my experience in Nigeria that the power that is often ascribed to the people in power, they really don't have it. The power exists in the minds of the people.
A construction.
Yeah, it's a total construct. When this became very clear to me was during the NSAS protest in 2020, where the person who is parading himself as Nigeria's president now, he was, you get no prizes for guessing which side of the protest he was on. He was obviously on the government side. And this is someone who had this this appearance of complete invincibility in Lagos. Nothing can touch him. He's the be all and end all. This man got onto his private jet and he ran away with his tail between his legs. He escaped to France at the point where the protest was starting to look like he was becoming something else. He ran away. So because at that point, people genuinely didn't care what was going to happen. Briefly, there was that sort of revolutionary mindset, briefly, and then the people in power saw what was happening and they ran away with their tails between their legs. It wasn't just him. Several other people who, in and around power, did that. Like, they got onto their private planes and they ran away. So a lot of the time, the power that people think these guys have is it's notional. They have as much power as you think they have. So it's been my experience that when they come across, even if it's one person who is willing to sort of stand and look them in the eye and push back, a lot of the time they don't even know what to do because they're just not used to it. They never get pushback. So, I mean, which is why some of my stories have these sort of really dramatic impacts that they do. So in 2020, for example, there was a story that I did which essentially stopped a very bad piece of legislation from getting passed. Right. And it was because of that story that I won the People Journalism Prize for Africa 2020. Now, basically what happened was this. So the rule is the bill has to pass through 3 readings in the House of Representatives. Then it goes to the Senate, then it goes to the President, and gets signed into law. That's it. It had passed through it had been rushed through 2 readings. The final reading was supposed to be the next morning. And a colleague of mine who was like a reporter at the House sent me like a crude PDF copy. There's another thing about Nigeria is there's no database to find out what is being discussed in your own House of Parliament. There's nothing. There's nowhere to go to know what bills are being read out. Nothing. So you have to depend on like a reporter or a friend who is there, who's gonna like take pictures of it with their phone, flip through the manual. Yeah, that's how I got a PDF copy. Someone literally took camera pictures with their phone of every page, used cam scanner, turned it into a PDF and sent it to me on WhatsApp. So I literally sat down that night with my 2 laptops set up and I tore through this bill. I wrote the analysis, very scathing analysis. I put it out the next morning, went super viral, and that's what stopped the bill dead in its tracks, right? Now, typically, what would happen is before there was someone like me on the scene, that bill would have gotten passed because everyone, even those who were aware of the bill, so I feel like, these people, look at what they're passing. And then it will become like a topic of like gossip on WhatsApp. These are our leaders. Look at what they are doing. And everyone is just there acting as if these are, dragons with fire coming out of their mouth. There's nothing you can do. No, you can push back. Which I suspect is why the Nigerian state considers me to be a rabble rouser. They consider me to be a troublemaker because the kind of work I do encourages people to push back, to talk back, to not be polite, to be rude, to demand aggressively, right? Which is what you're supposed to do as a citizen. It's your right. But the Nigerian establishment is very comfortable with passive citizens who think they have no power. So that's kind of what my work aims to do. And that's why I think if more people understood that there are results that can be had from from being aggressive, from not being supine. I think more people would. However, it is what it is. Not everybody gets it. Probably not everybody ever will. So
While you're doing this, you're actually, well, you're pissing off big guys, right? I mean, you're creating a huge following at the same time. You're having many people who are becoming enemies with you. How do you deal with that?
well, I just the way I see it is that I haven't done anything wrong. I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm trying to do my job. So as long as your reason for enmity with me isn't that I took a bribe and I buried a story, or I distorted a story, I said something that wasn't true, and I pushed propaganda. As long as that's not what your reason for having a problem with me is, as long as your reason for having a problem with me is that I told the truth, and you have a problem with it, then that's fine. That means the problem is with you, it's not with me. That's what I'm most concerned about. Right? That's how I sleep at night. Like, hey, I'm just doing my job. Which is why when we started and you used the word celebrity, I said, don't do that. I refuse to see myself in that light. I see myself as a journalist, first and foremost. And the job of a journalist is to establish that 2+2 is 4, pretty much. Is to tell the story that is actually there. Right. So if 2+2 being 4 is offensive to some certain people, well, I mean, there's not much I can do about that. But as long as it's not that I have done something that is objectively wrong, as long as it's not that I have done something that can be reasonably used against me, as long as that's not the case, well, if you don't like me, join the queue.
Congratulations.
On?
First of all, are there times that you doubt yourself and what you're doing? I mean, given the fact that you sued some of the most powerful agencies in the world, and I'm speaking about the CIA,
right,
FBI, I'm speaking about the IRS,
the DEA,
the DEA, State Department.
Attorneys, yeah.
How does one think about that and about doing that? Like, are there times where you go like, should I be keeping myself in check and seeing what I'm really doing here? Like, are there times where you're like, you know what, I'm doing this, but I think I'm putting my life on the line. I mean, you're obviously doing that every single time, but I think there are also levels to it.
I think this goes back to what I was saying just a few seconds ago, that people don't push back enough. Or people assume that it's not possible to push back. I think that part of the reason why there exists a class of criminals who have been able to embed themselves into leadership positions in Nigeria is that, first of all, not enough Nigerians have the information to even know how to even establish the background of these people. Not enough Nigerians have that information. Not enough Nigerians know that it's possible to access this information, that the places these people are coming from, their records kept for everything. It's about knowing where to look and knowing how to get access to it. The records exist. So there's that. And then secondly, that not enough people realize that regardless of however many roadblocks are placed in your path, there is always a way. There will always be a way. Like, as long as these records exist, this information exists somewhere, there will be a way to get it. And if I haven't found that way yet, it just means I haven't looked hard enough. There's going to be a way, right? So, it's not that, this is not to say that it's a straightforward thing that I just woke up one morning and like my FOIA was rejected and I said, oh yeah, so cool. Next thing I'm going to sue everyone. No, it's not that easy. I obviously had some help. Aaron Greenspan, the founder of plainsight.org, he obviously was a huge help because he knows these processes like the back of his hand. This is what he does on a day-to-day basis. So it was actually even his idea that if you like, we can take this further. And I'm like, yeah, I would like to. And how do I do that? And he outlined it to me. This is what we do. If FOIAs are rejected, this is the process for challenging that. There's a process for challenging that. Again, this is information most people don't have. Right? Most people think FOIA is rejected, that's it. You go home. No, you can challenge that. And this is the process. This is how the papers must be served. And then initially, I was even thinking small. I was just thinking of like maybe just the FBI file. He was the one who actually put the idea in my head. Look, it's not just the FBI, because everything in the US happens with like cross-agency cooperation. So if the FBI has files on him, the CIA probably does. The initial investigation was done by the IRS, so they definitely have files on him. And then this person obviously is a person of interest for US diplomatic purposes. So the State Department definitely would have some files on him as well. And then since this was a drug investigation, the DEA probably has files as well. And then the US attorneys, which basically oversees legal processes for US government institutions, they should be copied in this lawsuit as well. This is how you do it. And the only stumbling block to making this happen then is obviously the filing fees and all that. I'm like, yeah, I'll cover the costs. So $80 here, $400 there. He was also able to get a lawyer who basically did it pro bono, which was a massive help, because if we'd had to pay market rate for that, that's like $30,000 that I don't have. And I was the one paying for everything. So, it wouldn't have been possible. So there's that. But every step of the way, file this, file that, I'll pay. We keep it moving. Sometimes he's not allowed to file something. I have to file it myself. I would do it. And it was just put one foot in front of the other, right? I'm not going to pretend that I saw this coming. Like I planned for this to happen. No, it was just a case of, this is where I am now. That's where I want to be. I'm not looking at that now. I'm just looking at my feet and I'm putting one in front of the other. So right now, what is the process that I need to do right now? So the FOI has been rejected. Okay, we need to file a lawsuit. We need to get a lawyer who's going to work pro bono. We've got that. How do we file it? Okay, we've served papers on 5 of the 6. The CIA rejected service, being the very funny institution that it is, because it kind of functions almost outside of the US, almost like an independent country on its own. So there's a special process for serving papers on the CIA and all of that. This is how it's done. I just put one foot in front of the other. And then this was 2 Fridays ago. I was in the shower for a very long time. And I came out like it was around like 1 a.m. local time. And I got to like my phone on the bed. There was a message from Aaron. He's like, I have very good news. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe the very good news is that, because we were having issues with serving papers on the CIA. So maybe the good news is the CIA had accepted service, finally. Because initially what we had been told is this potentially could drag on until 2026. Oof. So I thought maybe that's the good news. Like, why is he using the term very? That's just good news. That's not very good news. Why is he exaggerating it or whatever? And I open and I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, cool, shoot. I'm listening. And he sends me this document, this PDF. And I open it. And I'm scanning through it, and I'm like, "You what, mate? You what? They're giving us everything." And I sent him a message like, "Aaron, what's going on? Why have they agreed?" And he's like, "I don't know, but there's a possibility a lot of it might be redacted. But nonetheless, this is huge." So this was the thing was dated September 11, which was a Monday. This was the previous Friday, which was like September 8th. So I couldn't talk about it yet until it was officially filed. So for like the whole weekend, I had to like sit down on it and keep my mouth shut, which was very difficult. I had to keep my mouth shut till it was filed officially. Monday afternoon, then it got filed. And I was like, yeah, okay, we're getting somewhere. And, I put it out. I had shared it with Samuel, who's the editor of People's Gazette as well. And, he ended up being the only mainstream editor in Nigeria who covered that story. Because the Tinubu government basically I'm sure you're aware, has put a media blackout on many of these stories involving his legitimacy. They've imposed a media blackout. It's not official, but it's very real. They've imposed a media blackout. So stories regarding the fact that he submitted a forged Chicago State University certificate to the electoral body, those stories are censored. You can't see them in Nigerian media. If you see something about them, the story is going to be distorted in a way. So, for example, the last court hearing, when we're having this conversation, the last court hearing about this, the lawyer representing Chicago State University said, we cannot, they were asked point blank, can you authenticate this certificate that was presented? They said, no, we cannot. Please, what does that mean? If a university tells you that this certificate you presented, purporting to be from them, that they cannot verify it, what does that mean?
It's not from them.
Precisely, it's a fake. That's as close to an admission of the fact as you are ever going to get. What was reported in Nigerian mainstream media? They said, so shortly after he made that statement that we can't authenticate this, Then he then made another statement that we can, however, verify that so and so person did in fact graduate, which is a meaningless comment because you've just said the certificate is fake, right? So that's the actual news story. Guess what Nigerian media ran with? Chicago State University confirms that Bola Ahmed Tinubu attended. Blah blah blah. That was the headline they all ran with. So that's kind of. But anyway, that's by the way. And then what we're talking about, the lawsuits against the 6 U.S. government agencies, they didn't even touch it at all. Because there's no way to spin it. Basically, there's no way to spin that one. So they just completely sidestepped it. Not a single one of them touched it. So that's what we're dealing with in 2023.
That's what we're dealing
Nigeria is like North Korea now.
And I think that's why it's very important to have independent journalists like yourself. Unless otherwise, people are just going to control, twist, and narrative as how they like.
Basically, we would be basically like, I mean, I don't know if I should mention this because I've had enough African heads of states counting themselves as enemies, but we'll basically become Eritrea. Where basically anything that isn't, Isaias Afwerki is a great man, he's going to lose you your head. That's essentially what Nigeria is becoming. The media has always been very heavily influenced by the states, but now it's not just influence, it's control.
It's controlled, completely controlled.
Yeah, it's become almost like a sort of propaganda state almost. So you would have seen a few days ago when the president's Twitter handle made a very joyful announcement. The visa restrictions against Nigeria to the UAE have been lifted. Nigerian citizens can now travel to Dubai again, blah, 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 blah. The entire Nigerian media ran with it. Meanwhile, I read the statement from the UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It said nothing about that. It just said the Prime Minister of UAE met with the President of Nigeria and they discussed areas of mutual cooperation. That's all the statement said. Nigerian media ran with UAE visa ban lifted. And then a few days later, the CNN put out a story because they spoke to the UAE government. The UAE government was like, no, the visa ban has not been lifted. So that's what we're dealing with now. So basically, it's a few of us independents who are actually making any attempt to put out factual news. Now, the entirety of Nigerian media has become a press release factory coming from the State House.
So the question will be, do they know what's happening and they just choose to ignore it, or they don't even have an idea of what's happening? They're not even doing their homework. They're not digging deep.
I think it's both. Some of them know and are actively being dishonest, but the vast majority of them are. I was about to swear on your podcast. I'm not going to do that. But the vast majority of them are not the sharpest tools in the box. That's just the reality. So what we've just mentioned, what we just outlined now, the process from sending an FOIA and then the lawsuits and then the response to the lawsuit, all of that, the majority of them have probably never heard of any of this. Even though this is their job. This is probably news to them.
Wow, very incompetent people.
Extremely, very much so.
It's shocking and it's scary too at the same time. Because these are the people who we expect for them to report and tell us what the hell is going on. And clearly seems they're not doing their work well. At all.
At all.
Like completely.
Yeah, how to be a journalist in Nigeria is you take press releases from the government and you spit them out. That's how to be a good journalist in Nigeria. How to be a terrible journalist who needs to go back to journalism school is that you fact check things, you carry out your own investigations, you confirm things for yourself, regardless of what the government said or didn't say, and you only put out what you can confirm. That's how to be a bad journalist.
You mean the basics?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much
the basics. One of the questions I asked you on our first episode was that, should we expect anything good out of Tinubu's administration? And your answer was plain, no, we shouldn't, right?
I wasn't wrong, was I?
I don't think you were. But at the same time, let me ask this. Is there anything good that he has done? When I saw the news about UAE, I was like, oh, at least finally he's doing something. And then boom, all of a sudden it's like, okay, he got me.
Yeah, so I think that tells you that's the answer to your question right there. This has been exactly what I said it would be. It's been an administration that believes that it can substitute governance with propaganda. It can substitute results with press releases. They genuinely believe that. And this is because this is exactly how he governed when he was the governor of Lagos State. I was born and raised in Lagos. I was 9 years old when he became the governor of Lagos. I was 17 when he left office. And even though he left office, I mean, he's still there by proxy, since he left. So, like, pretty much all my adult life, I've had a very sort of up close and personal view of what it meant, of what governance means. So these guys are propaganda merchants. That's it. That's what they do. You would have seen a few days ago they put out, there was this news article, the Blue Line, which is like a metro rail system in Lagos, has finally been launched. They had a huge commissioning party. They had these lovely blue-colored EMU units. EMU is short for electronic something units. It's a type of train. It's an electric train, basically. They had these lovely EMUs, which were perfect for photo ops. And then guess what? It's DMUs which are actually pulling the EMUs. The DMU is a diesel engine. So you had diesel engines pulling the electric carriages because the power project for the rail line has not been completed. But they wanted to do a photo op. So you have diesel carriages on an electric track, which is insane. But that's what governance means to these guys. And by the way, that project, which took off in 2023, do you know when construction began? Guess?
You said it took off when?
Like they've supposedly completed it in 2023. Do you know when
2023
construction started?
I'll go with maybe 2010.
2009. 2009. That's when construction started. And by the way, that's one line of 5.
One line of 5.
So the metro system is supposed to have 5 rail lines. Like the way London has district line, Bakerloo line, Circle line. So there's supposed to be red line, blue line, yellow line, purple line. There's just one line they've completed since 2009. One line. So there's 4, which is pretty much, one of the 4, which is the red line, kind of shares track with a federal project, which was already completed by the federal government. So that one technically is completed, but the other 3 exist on paper. So since 2009, pretty much that's the results. To put that in perspective, the Addis Ababa Light Rail, which kicked off roughly around the same time in Ethiopia, they completed theirs inside 2 years.
Wow.
2 years. And it wasn't one line, it was 2 lines.
Nigeria is a very fascinating country.
Fascinating is one way of putting it.
It's
one way of putting it.
It's because when you hear stories about the people, the government, it's hard to imagine that such a thing is true.
Well, I mean, this is an issue. This thing even causes fights between my girlfriend and I, right? Because my girlfriend is Kenyan, and she's always like, I don't like the way you Nigerians are always talking about Nigeria like it's such a terrible place, blah, blah, blah. Everywhere has challenges, but I'm like, you have no idea. Like, you really have no idea. Everywhere has, like, there are challenges everywhere, yes. Nigeria is special. When Africans are complaining that their police forces are corrupt, Nigerians don't talk. Because a typical African policeman who stops you on the road, he wants to collect some money from you, that he's going to waste your time and he's going to let you go. The Nigerian one is liable to shoot you dead in addition to wasting your time. So the level of dysfunction in Nigeria, even by African standards, is something most of you are simply not visually familiar with. You couldn't understand. You have to be there to comprehend. Get it. You can't.
Is there anyone who keeps anyone in check?
I guess that's the job I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, clearly.
I guess that's the job I'm trying to do. It's certainly not the police. It's certainly not the armed forces. It's certainly not the judicial system. We saw what the appeal court did a few days ago, where they gave some of the most ridiculous judgments I've ever seen in my lifetime. So, no, short answer, there really isn't. It's a country that's running on autopilot.
Wow.
And to be honest, you are Tanzanian, so like you should be aware. For example, a Nigerian passport holder trying to get to Tanzania or to Kenya or whatever, they need a visa. Why is that? Think about it logically, why would people from the largest economy in Africa need visas to visit other African countries? It doesn't make sense logically, but when you think about it from the point of view of these other African governments have seen the level of craziness going on in Nigeria. And they're like, hold up, we need to protect ourselves. Yeah, it's a thing. So I've spoken to public officials in Ghana who are like, they are terrified of the possibility of like the Nigerian state imploding. They are terrified of that possibility because Accra is 400 kilometers away from Lagos. It's within trekking distance, basically. It's like a 4-day trek, really. They're terrified of that possibility, of that eventuality, because they all know there's something deeply unsavory going on in the Nigerian state. Deeply, deeply unpleasant. They're all aware. So yeah, that's the reality of the place that I call home.
I mean, so would you go as far as being able to call Nigerian government a failed state?
Not quite. It's a failing state. It's not a failed state.
It's a failing.
A failed state is what Somalia was in 2009. That's a failed state. That's a state that has literally zero state capacity to do anything. Nigeria isn't quite that level. In fact, if you were to visit, like as you are now, if you were to catch a flight to Lagos, a lot of what I'm saying, you might not believe it. It looks like it's a perfectly functional place. Like at face value, everything is fine. If you look at Lagos and you look at Nairobi, you might not see that much of a difference. To start with, everything looks, the people are not that different. The same kind of vibe you get off street hustlers in Kampala. That's how it is in Lagos. It seems like, oh yeah, this is just another African country. Until you stay there for like a week or two. And then you notice things that you don't notice anywhere else. You notice that when the lights go off in Lagos, they really go off. Like when the lights go off in Kampala or in Nairobi, they go off for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. When they go off in Lagos, they go off for 2 days, 3 days. And that's a normal thing. Like that's a regular occurrence. That's not strange. Like, because everybody has a generator. So when lights go off, the general noise level goes up because all the generators come on. So like what they're going through in South Africa right now, and to them it's like, oh my God, this is such a strange new experience. We are like, haha, welcome to the club. We've been there since the 80s, right? You have to see it to understand it. And there was something my girlfriend said a few days ago on Twitter. She said every African needs to visit Nigeria at least once in their life. I agree.
Oh, I clearly have to.
I agree. I completely agree. Not just obviously to see how messed up it is or whatever. They're also, it's a very, for you to understand why Africa is where it is, you kind of need to visit Nigeria, like to get it. Like, okay, this place, which is supposed to be the powerhouse of this continent, this is what is actually happening here. And then you can start to see everything else as a microcosm of that. And then it starts to make sense to you. So yes, I tend to agree with that.
What do you think is the reason that has made Nigeria to be in a position that it is right now?
That's a very, there are many reasons.
Said like this is one of the major.
Primarily, you would say it's bad leadership primarily. But what I would say, in addition to bad leadership and absence of consequences for bad behavior, it's also that for whatever reason, whether it's learned behavior or whether it's cultural, I don't know, but Nigerians, for whatever reason, regardless of how loud and boisterous as you might perceive them to be, are actually extremely meek and docile people. Like, so my girlfriend didn't believe this until she actually went to Nigeria. Because I've been telling her this thing that the Nigerians, in Johannesburg and in Nairobi and in Kigali, strutting around the place like they own it with their loud booming voices, those were like 10% of the Nigerian population. The vast majority of Nigerians are people you never see or hear from.
Really?
She didn't believe that until she went to Nigeria and saw it for herself. The vast majority of Nigerians are poor, downtrodden people who don't look you in the eye when you look at them. That's the vast majority. So people like me, we are part of like the privileged 10th. Those are the people you see. So the Nigerian that you are familiar with is a minority at home. The real Nigerian, statistically, is a subsistence farmer in Kogi State who probably got access to the internet sometime in 2016 and probably still uses an Android smartphone that's like running on the first or second generation of Android software. Statistically, that's the Nigerian. Very poor, very meek, very, has no voice. Is not used to talking back, basically. It's very obsequious to power and authority. They use terms like they say a lot of things like pray for our leaders and things like that. And they use terms like daddy to refer to politicians and mommy. That's the real Nigerian. So there is the people have over time have become very like there's this learned helplessness that exists in Nigeria, which is why someone like me, I'm viewed as such an oddity back home. Where does this guy get his audacity from? Because that's not how we are raised. We are raised to be polite. We are raised to say yes, sir, thank you, sir. When the elder or the rich man, where the person in position of power is eating a chicken drumstick, and you are there and you're hungry, and this fat man is eating a chicken drumstick, your job is to wait until he has stripped off all the flesh on the drumstick and he leaves the bone, which is like glistening with saliva, and then you take the bone with your grateful hands and you say, yes, sir, thank you, sir, thank you very much, sir. And you take those crumbs. That's how we are trained. Maybe not me, because obviously I was a millionaire's kid, but the majority of Nigerians, that is how they are raised, literally, to be thankful for the nothing that they that they have. Which you can translate that to why historically there's such an aversion to protest in Nigeria. Nigeria has very little protest culture.
But loud on Twitter.
Yeah, but like in where it actually matters. So I can tell you, for example, over the past 12 years, guess the number of significant protest movements that have taken place in Nigeria. Like, and when I say protest movement, I mean like broad-based general protest, not like one particular like a religious group is protesting on the road. No, like a general nationwide thing. Guess how many over the past 12 years?
5.
Two. One was in 2012. It was called Occupy Nigeria, and even that was instigated by political opposition then, which is now the ruling party. The second was End SARS in 2020. 2 in 12 years. That's terrible. Meanwhile, in France, protest is like every Tuesday. Like every Tuesday, for any time a mosquito sneezes in France, French people start burning cars. They're always, because they understand that this is their rights. We have a right to be heard. So the guy he has his job at a warehouse, whatever. He finishes his shift. Then he wears his yellow vest and he goes out onto the streets, that yellow vest movement thing. And he spends the weekend basically rioting almost, turning over cars and, whatever. And that's fine. Monday morning, he goes back to work. He does his work for the week. Friday morning, he's out with his yellow vest again. They did that for like how many months? That would never happen in Nigeria. That would never happen. We have no protest culture because that's not how we are raised. So I know like it's very sort of what's the word I'm looking for? You're struggling to believe this. There's a particular word. Every time I'm looking for a word, it escapes my head. I don't know if I'm the only person this happens to. Counterintuitive is the word I'm looking for. I know it sounds counterintuitive to you because the Nigerians you are familiar with are very assertive, but that's actually the minority relative to the majority of Nigeria's population. We are very obsequious people. We're not actually that different to the rest of Africa. It's just those loud ones that you see. The majority of us have no voice whatsoever. So I think that's actually the major reason why Nigeria is the way it is. Is that the followership, the vast majority of Nigeria's population just has no intention of standing up for itself. The vast majority of Nigeria's population would rather go to church and pray. Pray for better times to happen. Pray for good leadership. Pray for leaders to do obvious things that they should do. Pray for economic upliftment, because obviously the GDP comes from prayer. Pray for everything and hope. And then when you mix in with, there's this sort of delusional optimism that a lot of us are also raised with, that somehow, regardless of whatever is happening across the country, somehow our individual case is going to be different. somehow, So there's a there's a there's a like a very popular gospel song in Nigeria that I think encapsulates that mindset. You might have heard it because it's like a trending thing on Instagram now. It goes like the lyrics are like, um, I've still got joy in chaos. I've got peace that makes no sense. Because I built my life on Jesus. He will never let me down. I've still got joy in chaos. So that's the Nigerian mindset. That yeah, the lights go off for 3 days at a time. Yes, the roads go bad and we don't fix them for 4 years until it's time for an election. Yes, we go to the hospital and doctors are using flashlights to carry out cesarean section, and there's no running water for doctors to wash their hands in between patients. Yes, the policeman who is drunk is likely to shoot you dead at a roadblock at night for no goddamn reason. Yes, all of that is the case. However, once I get to my house, my little island, and I put on my generator, and I'm hidden behind my tall wall fence with the barbed wire razors on it, and my generator is on, I have power in my house, and I can watch my DSTV, and I'm watching Arsenal beat Man United, and have this little pretense of normalcy around me. I'm perfectly fine. That's the Nigerian dream. And by the way, when in saying this, I'm not excluding myself, because to an extent that's also how I was raised. It's just that instead of literally being in the middle of chaos and having an island of just your house, we had a whole neighborhood that was the island in the middle of chaos. So I grew up in a neighborhood called Ogudu GRA. GRA is an acronym that means Government Reservation Area. So it's a GRA generally tends to be like an elite area in Nigeria, because that's essentially a place where the governments in the 70s and 80s basically reserved for high-ranking military officers, high-ranking civil servants like my dad used to be, that sort of thing. So it's basically old money people who live in these GRAs. So the GRA is like this little island of opulence. When you're coming down the expressway, you come up to Ogudu because it's on a hill, right? So the area itself of Ogudu is not a particularly wealthy area. I mean, it looks a lot better now. It used to look really grimy when I was small. And you're driving through it, and then there's a left turn. There's this massive, mighty estate gate, and you drive through the gate, and you're in a different world. You're in Calabasas, And it's like this huge development, and you are like completely shielded from the world outside. But once you come outside, even the air smells different. And that's not an exaggeration. The roads are different. There are no street lights. So within that little place, those little islands of elite existence, that's where you have your friends. That's where you go to school. That's where you have your hospitals. That's where you have your life. That's where you go to church, for most people anyway. In my case, it was a bit different because my parents were Jehovah's Witnesses. So we had to go to worship in like a really poor area. So I think actually the seeds of this sort of mindset that I have were planted in my childhood, because I was one of the few people who had the privilege to see both sides. So I'm living in Calabasas, but I'm worshiping in Ikosiketu, right? Literally. And because we're Jehovah's Witnesses, we have to go out preaching.
And I think it's interesting where you come from and where you go to where the majority of the people are.
Oh, yeah. So like we lived in an 8-bedroom mansion, right? There are like between 4 and 6 cars at any given point in time in the house. Really mighty place. We still own it. Built across 2.5 plots. Really nice place. And we basically leave that private republic we had, come out of the GRA, drive down the expressway. It's like 6 or 7 kilometers down the expressway to Ikosiketu, where directly opposite across the highway, there's this huge refuse like landfill, which has a really offensive smell, which sort of wafts over the whole Ikosiketu area. And that's where the Kingdom Hall, because that's what the church was called. Kingdom Hall was, funny enough, my dad built it because he owned land there. And he built it and donated it to the church, right? And we'd go there and we'd worship, and the smell would be wafting in our worship. And I hated it. And then afterwards, we have to go out preaching in the neighborhood. And I used to find it so offensive. I could never say this, obviously, but I used to find it so offensive that you're like, we know who we are, right? We know where we're coming from. We know the kind of life we have, right? We can't even drive to where these people are. We have to park the car at the Kingdom Hall, sometimes behind, like inside where it's safe, and then come out on foot and then walk around on foot and tell a bunch of poor people that the solution to their problems is God's kingdom. And I'm thinking to myself, hey, if you signed a check for 100,000 naira, you could solve this guy's problems. I'm looking at my dad. You could solve this guy's problems. Like, what problems does this guy have as he is now? 100,000 naira could solve his problems and could be a life-changing sum of money for him. And you could without thinking, you could fling that out and not notice that you did. But here we are telling these people that, they need to read this Bible portion with us, giving them publications. It used to be really bad when I was little, because when I was little, we actually had to sell the publications to them and then remit the money to the church. So these people already have nothing, and then you're trying to take their 10 and 20 naira for Watchtower and a week. I hated doing that. I absolutely, oh my goodness. It got a bit better because after a while they didn't have to pay anymore, but it still I found it really offensive that I have left a life that these people cannot understand. They cannot relate to. They probably don't know that a place called Ogudi GRA exists.
Can't even imagine it.
Yeah, it's outside their scope of reference, right? Like that this guy goes to a school where the annual school fees could possibly buy this house. And that's not an exaggeration, right? So my high school, by my second high school, Grange School, the school fees as when I was a student, this was between 2003 and 2005. It was between 1,500 to 2,000 pounds a term. So let's say in a year you're paying 6,000 pounds. That could easily buy one of those buildings in the slum, easily without breaking a sweat. And that's like my school fees. And then here I am, coming from that world to tell you that the solution to your problems, your child probably goes to some shitty ass public school. Your child will never have the life, because already from that age, you can already tell that you're looking at your age mates who are in that environment, and you can already see there's such a disparity. You can already see that the way you think, the way they think,
the mentality,
very different. You can already see that your life trajectories are going in very different directions. So,
and I think it's also the opportunities that you're going to be exposed to.
Yes. So you're 16 years old. You're applying. You're doing a UCAS application. You're applying to go to University of Nottingham. I was applying to go to Nottingham Trent University. Sorry, the second choice was University of Hull. I'm going to university. My entire family, all 5 of us children, all went to university outside the country. We all went to the UK, and then these people who, if they manage to get admission into a Nigerian university, it will be a major, major victory. Maybe no one in their family has ever gone to university before.
First generation.
Yeah, and then here I am inside this house. They call it Face Me, I Face You in Nigeria. It's like a slum house where there's just rooms.
Door to door.
Yeah, and then they all share one toilet down the hallway, right? And the whole place smells of pee. It's hot, it's humid, I hate it here. And I'm here telling you that the solution to your problems lies in this tract or this magazine from some dickhead who printed it in Pennsylvania. I cannot tell you how much I absolutely detested that. And I mean, it's not a coincidence that I'm completely irreligious now, because I saw things when I was growing.
And I think people listening and watching this would go like, hey, you can't speak that way of Nigeria, of Africa, and you have to portray the place you come from in a good light. But the reality is that's exactly what you're trying to avoid doing, right? Creating bias. It's like, this is how things are, that's how they are. I mean,
so what I find more important is to improve the situation as against giving you the impression that the situation is good. Right. So even though, at the same time, I do understand how important, perception management is, especially in geopolitics and in the global conversation. Perception is extremely important.
Absolutely.
No doubt about that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And Africa definitely has had the wrong end of the stick, because Africa is wrongly portrayed as something that it's not. right? Many people outside Africa don't realize that African cities are pretty much like any other cities. Everything you can have in Mexico City or in Buenos Aires or in Brussels, you can have it in Nairobi too. Most people don't realize that. You can have it in Abuja, you can have it in Lumumbashi. Most people do not know
Joburg.
these things.
Yeah.
You know, so yes, I agree that's definitely a problem. However, I also think that a lot of, especially those of us who have this Pan-African or Pan-Africanist outlook, tend to focus a lot or obsessively on trying to manage reputations
Yeah.
as against trying to actually improve the situation on ground. An example of this is the recent Zimbabwean elections, for example, which everybody and their dog knows Mnangagwa did not win that election, and that election was I mean, if the Nigerian election was flawed, I'm looking for the adjective to use to describe the Zimbabwean election. That wasn't an election. That was a disgrace. Right?
And then just after appointed the child.
But here's the thing: in the immediate aftermath, you had people like what's that lady's name, Dr. Arika Nachi Kwao, going on like Arise TV in Nigeria, doing his media tour around the world, and talking about how people should stop talking about how, you know, if Zimbabwean elections are this, that every country has its problems, blah, 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 blah. And if you're not perceptive enough, you will almost get swayed by that argument. That why is everyone always picking on this tiny country? But actually, the reality is the people should be respected enough for their votes to actually count. So if you say that you are running a revolutionary regime, which basically was conceived to basically defeat settler colonialism, which is obviously a very valid thing, because for the avoidance of doubt, ZANU-PF actually needed to exist at a point. The Ian Smith, the Rhodesian regime that came before it was terrible. It was an apartheid regime basically, and it was a crime against humanity, right? So there needed to be a war of independence. There needed to be ZANU and ZAPU. These things needed to exist. However, to then say that because you were the vessel through which this hostile foreign entity was defeated, that then gives you the right and the power to then oppress the same people you claim to have freed, that's where I have an issue. So that's what I mean when I say that there's a gap between being obsessively focused with reputation management, with perception management, and actually being focused on what's actually important, right? Because I think if you respected the basic human rights of Zimbabweans, if you were not throwing your political opponents into prison in Harare, if you're allowing the people's votes to actually matter and to actually count, then I don't think anybody's really going to be that interested in shitting on your country, right? You give them ammunition. And it's a similar thing in Nigeria, because we have those people too in Nigeria who always like, oh, you're always talking terribly about Nigeria. You never have anything good to say about Nigeria, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, bro, Nigeria has 200 million people, right? So within the 200 million of us, I think there are enough of us to not be bothered what anybody is or is not saying about us. The only opinion that matters is what we think about ourselves, right? And the truth is, we all know what the reality is on ground, so let's fix it. Let's not fixate so much on perception. Obviously, perception is important, and the people who work on that, they exist already. There are already enough of them. We don't need more of them. We need problem solvers, not more, PR people. We have enough PR people,
Which reminds me of your TED Talk on Wakanda.
Death to Wakanda. That was a good one.
Yeah, I mean, saying death to Wakanda isn't something that would be easy for people to grasp unless we unpack that for them. But most of the times, and I think, I can also confess that I've been a victim of this, right? The fact that I go like, Africa is rich in resources, and the map that, has African countries, with the resources that they have. And then we go like, we can be rich because we have resources, right? But then when you unpacked it on the TED Talk, I was like, this makes a lot of sense, right? And you are speaking about how, Africa is only viewed in terms of resources. The same thing that has been depicted in Wakanda Forever, exactly. Right? And that is why I'm saying, in as much as, it's good to tell the stories and, having individuals like Wodemaya doing an amazing job telling all these amazing stories, but we can't deny the fact that there's also reality, right? And Julius Nyerere put it well when he said, you cannot solve the problems that you deny exist.
Exactly.
And Wakanda, death to Wakanda.
So, for those who don't know, what I basically the point of that TED talk was that there is an obsessive focus on the things that are buried in the ground in Africa. The diamonds, the tin, lithium, cobalt,
Crude oil.
gold, crude oil, all of those things, nickel, copper.
The diamonds.
That basically, yes, those things do have some value. But the point is, what really has value is people, because it is people that process those things and turn those things into more valuable things. If you are not developing people and you are just focused exclusively on those things, all you are ever going to get is the raw material prices for those things. And that the raw material prices, regardless of whatever we may think, the prices for those raw materials will never be set by the places the raw materials come from. The prices that we pay for those raw materials are always determined by where there is demand for them. So it's the factories that determine how much the mines get paid, not the other way around. So it's the people who buy those resources from Asia, from Europe, from North America. Those are the people who get to determine how much you will get for your gold, your cobalt, your nickel, your copper, your lithium, your whatever it is. So the point of that TED Talk was African people and African governments need to start seeing 1.2 billion Africans as the continent's primary resource. Right? Europe is not a resource-rich continent in terms of natural resources. Right? Obviously, there are a few outliers like Norway, which have like crude oil and whatnot. But look at a country like Germany or the UK. What resources do they have?
You don't even hear them.
What resources do they have? Finland. Is it fish? What resources do they have? And yet those guys have the highest standards of living in the world. Why do they have that?
That's a good question.
Part of the reason, obviously, is the exploitation of Africa. We know that. But a larger part of the reason is that they have human capital.
Which they value.
Exactly.
And treasure.
Human capital. That's it. It's as simple as that. Human capital. Which is what, and we have humans, but we lack human capital. You know? We have 1.2 billion people, but how many of them are developed?
I mean, I think a lot of things that you're saying right now remind me of what Nyerere was saying, right? One of the things he also said was that when he was trying to define development, he said development to us isn't buildings or roads. That is part of it.
Yeah.
But the most part of it is that for us, development should be in developing our own people.
Exactly.
Which we are not doing.
Exactly.
Like, we just keep on speaking about, Africa is going to have the largest population by, 2030. You know. But that population doing what?
Yeah, in Nigeria, as I was telling you prior to the recording, it's now established that Nigeria has huge reserves of lithium. And because of the electric vehicle production boom, lithium is now becoming a very in-demand resource. And trust the Nigerian government, they've seen dollar signs in lithium. So the solid mineral ministry has become the new hot thing in town. It used to be the petroleum ministry, but now it's the solid minerals ministry because that's now the new hot ticket. Meanwhile, at the same time, while everyone is focusing on digging lithium out of the ground, the same Nigerian government is telling Nigerian students that they can no longer fund universities and universities have to hike their fees by a factor of 5 or 6. And there's this, if you check my Twitter, there's this horrible videos that have been going around, students protesting and crying. Like, do they want the poor to drop out? And I'm like, yeah, they do, basically.
That's what they're saying.
Pretty much. Because this is the next generation of people who are going to give the country any kind of hope. And you are basically telling them you cannot fund their education. You cannot fund their development, their human capital development. So why does the government exist?
Like, what are they developing?
Why does a government exist? What is the primary function of a government? It's to provide services to people.
Save your people.
Certain services, justice, security, some measure of health and education, and a framework with which to achieve self-actualization. That's the purpose of a government. You're not doing that. You're not doing that. The justice, are you providing it? Security, are you providing it? The enabling environment, are you providing it? The infrastructure, the healthcare now, the education, which is the last thing. the only thing which has made Nigeria relatively competitive, especially on the global stage, is subsidized education. That's the one thing Nigeria has ever had going for it. Not crude oil, not anything else. Subsidized education. And I can prove this with numbers. So as at 2022, well, let me go back to 2019 because the numbers became a bit fuzzy as the years went by. Between crude oil and diaspora remittances, which do you think earned more forex for Nigeria in 2019, 2020?
Diaspora.
Diaspora remittances. As much as crude oil makes money, diaspora remittances made more, significantly more. Why are there diaspora remittances? Because Nigerians are able to travel and work.
Everywhere.
Why are they able to work? Because they are internationally competitive, because they were able to access subsidized education at home. It's as simple as that. You are taking that away, you are killing your own economy in the future, basically. Because you're not going to have future, young people who later immigrate to send remittances home. And then the young people who are here, you're not giving them the ability to do anything for themselves. And then you see them making statements like, vocational education. When they say vocational education, they're not talking about coding or something. They're talking about like shoemaking, hairdressing, tailors, carpenters.
Soap making.
Yeah. That's what they're talking about. Cake baking. Bead making. That kind of shit. So this is the reality, right? That when you have, and this is not just a Nigerian problem, I think it's an African problem. African countries focus so much on the wealth they think they have under the soil, and they completely fail to understand that thing under the soil is not wealth. That thing is just dirt. What gives it any value is what people do with it. And if the only people who can do something with it are located in Europe or in Asia, why on earth would they give you what you consider to be a fair price for it? Why would they? If I were in their shoes, I wouldn't either. It's not in my interest.
It's like I want to make the maximum profit I possibly can.
Exactly.
And I give you the lowest price I possibly can.
So, and this thinking permeates the Nigerian state specifically. It permeates, for example, Nigeria is a country which it's been estimated Nigeria needs at least 100,000 megawatts of electricity to escape poverty. How many megawatts of electricity is the Nigerian grid able to wheel out on a regular basis? Just guess.
Let's go with at least maybe around 10%.
5,000. So 5%, right? So
Jesus.
Now that's one data point, right? Now the second data point, Nigeria has some of the largest gas reserves in the world. And obviously, gas is like a very reliable source of energy for, power plants, right? So the obvious thing is that the Nigerian government should be looking for how to develop those gas reserves to build power plants, basically to industrialize Nigeria. That should be it. Instead, what is the Nigerian government looking to do with its gas? It wants to build a pipeline to supply to Europe.
We are going back to the story of Niger.
Yeah. It wants to build that's it. So instead of seeing the bigger picture that if you add 100,000 megawatts to Nigeria's power supply, you are going to add $2 or $3 trillion to the Nigerian GDP. Right? And you are going to instead of doing that, you want to make $40 or $50 billion a year from selling gas to Europe.
Short-term vision.
Very short-sighted.
Minds are here.
So that's what I mean when I said death to Wakanda. That shit needs to die. It actually does.
And everyone was celebrating Wakanda. And it's like it's packed in a story in a way that it affects you and the way you perceive yourself and your people. You don't even fucking know that it's happening.
Exactly. Like I personally, in as much as I'm a huge fan of the MCU, I watch every Marvel movie. Everyone. From the very first Iron Man movie I've watched every single one. I'm a huge fan. I was a fan of the comic series when I was a kid because I used to have the comics. But I'm also perceptive enough to know that movie called Black Panther and, the Black Panther franchise, whether intentionally or not, I consider that thing to be some sort of psychological warfare against Africans. I'm sorry. That's how I consider it to be. So the country known as Wakanda, what is the only thing that gives Wakanda value?
Vibranium.
It's vibranium. It's not the Wakandans. Right? The movie goes to extremes to make it very clear that it's not that the Wakandans are so bright, it's that the vibranium is so magical. That's what it is.
Gives us the
Vibranium
value we
gives them
have.
everything. Their technology, their health, everything is vibranium. Even the Black Panther is not really the Black Panther if he doesn't drink that vibranium
Holy
infused
shit.
thing, right? Now, how is power transmitted in this futuristic vibranium-powered country? Is there a system for transmitting power? Is it democratically transmitted? No. There's a king, and when power is moving from one king to another, they have to fucking fight for it. Like, they have to literally get into a pool and fucking wrestle. And somebody has to fucking die, pretty much. That's how power is transmitted. That's an insult. So I don't know whether this was deliberate. I don't want to go into the realms of conspiracy theory, but I watched that the first, because I think it was 2018 that movie came out, and I was like, this is bullshit. This is bullshit. This is not what, if the country of Wakanda is supposed to be some sort of, Afrofuturist thing, this is not what Afrofuturism should look like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's by coincidence.
We have no way of knowing that. So, as a journalist.
But at least you can make an educated guess.
Well, as a journalist, I have to play devil's advocate.
I'm into conspiracy theories, so I'll go with my my own perception about that. But here's the question: how many people who have watched that movie, have celebrated it, have even for a second think of it the way you've thought of it?
Well, obviously, not many. Which was partly why I chose that very provocative title for that TED Talk that I chose. Death to Wakanda.
It's scary.
Yeah. Because people need to understand that this is not how to run a successful country. Like, one of the other things which is like, it's screaming bullshit to me is Wakanda is located in Africa, right? Does it have any relationships with any of its neighbors?
It's
No.
living in an isolation.
It's a hermit. Meanwhile, I think everybody and their dog knows by now that there is no future for any African country, at least in sub-Saharan Africa, if that country doesn't intend to integrate with its neighbors. Who are you going to trade with? If you're a hermit kingdom, you're basically North Korea. You're going to be poor. And there's no vibranium that's going to make you wealthy, no matter how much gold or crude or whatever it is you have. That's not how economics works. Right? So the fictional Wakanda country is several layers of absolute BS. It's impossible. You can't run an economy that way if you're in an African context. And the idea that because the backstory of Wakanda is that unlike their fellow Africans, they were lucky enough to find vibranium. And it's because of vibranium that they weren't colonized. And then if I think it's in Black Panther 2, where you see the Wakandans have an outpost in Mali, right? And take like an embassy stroke outpost in Mali, and you see what Mali looks like. And Mali looks like exactly the way it looks in real life. It's poor, it's dirty, it's undeveloped. And then the Wakandans have this huge high-tech lab in the middle of the desert, where there's like basically magic going on inside. And it's like, how is this different to like the US having $100 million drone base in Agadez, in the middle of Niger? How is it different? This is a colonial lens, basically. Wakanda is a colonial entity. It's a colonizer.
It's France.
Yeah, pretty much.
In West Africa.
Pretty much. So death to Wakanda, because people need to understand that is not how to run a country. Certainly not in Africa. That's not how economics works. That's not how diplomacy works. That's not how governance works.
Okay, let's assume Nigeria is Wakanda, because we've been speaking about Nigeria. And for them, it's oil. Now, well, it seems like we are now entering into a new wave of apparently development and technology. And apparently we have to move from oil to green energy. Right? Now we have to use electric vehicles.
Right.
And the only thing, assuming now this is just painting an image. Now assuming that what gave value to Nigeria is oil. which in reality, most African countries have value simply because of what's underneath their ground, natural resources. And now there's all this movement of, countries like the US pushing down on African countries like, hey, you need to adapt to green energy and use electric vehicles. And recently we just had the climate summit happening in Nairobi, and we saw the whole drama and the things that were happening there. And if crude oil was the only thing that gave Nigeria its value, and now Nigeria is forced to adapt to electric vehicles, what does this mean to a country like Nigeria?
It means very little, because in the first place, it's functionally impossible to make Nigeria adopt electric vehicles. It's just not realistic. How do you want to do it? The cheapest, like the absolute, like, is maybe it's been used 5 times. The cheapest Tesla you can find on the market maybe retails for like $30,000. Right? That's like, maybe it's like 8 years old. It has had like 3 owners. So is there a market for that in sub-Saharan Africa? No, there isn't. People simply can't afford it, first of all. So first of all, on that level, it's bullshit. Secondly, and more importantly, this whole idea that somehow the combustion engine is an African problem in terms of emissions. I'm going to try to be very measured with my comments here. So I was telling you a few hours ago that I remember, I think it was 2020, I saw a story on BBC Africa that left me very annoyed. So it was a story stating that the Rwandan government had introduced basically a bunch of brightly colored bicycles around Kigali.
Green and yellow.
Yeah, for the purpose of cutting emissions. And I went back and did some math. Right, I consulted the stats because I always like to use data. Right, as a journalist, you have to use data. How many cars are present in the entirety of Kigali? Right, which is a city of about 750 square kilometers. How many cars can be found in Kigali? Roughly about 30,000. Kigali already has one of the world's lowest densities of combustion engine 4-wheeled vehicles. Right, there are not enough cars. There are not enough combustion engine vehicles in Kigali. So if you say you are cutting emissions, what are you cutting? I am hungry, right? No, I'm not hungry. I am chronically malnourished, right? My ribs are showing, my legs are spindly, I have a huge head, I look like I'm surviving in the middle of a civil war. And then I tell you, hey, I want to go to the gym to lose weight. Am I delusional? Am I stupid? Am I blind? Am I all three? That's how I feel about this climate conversation in Africa. The climate is not an African issue. It's just not, right? And there are statistics to back this. So Africa contributes less than 3% to total global emissions.
Like what manufacturing industries do you have
to anything? And when I say 3%, I'm being generous because I'm pairing that 3% to Africa's total share of global trade, which is about 3%. In reality, it's possibly a lot less than 3%. There are shipping companies which, when you calculate the total amount of emissions that they put out, have more emissions than the entire continent of Africa. Shipping companies, right? The US Army is, I think, how many I think 5 or 6 times the total amount of emissions that the continent of Africa is responsible for. The US Army alone can comfortably cover that. The US military, sorry, not the US Army. So that's the US Air Force, Navy, and the ground, and the Army. So when we talk about using electric vehicles in Africa and cutting, what are you talking about? This is a question that I have asked before because I feel like there is a whole demographic of sort of wannabe Greta Thunbergs, right? This is not just in Africa, this is around the world, right? There's a whole group of people who have figured out that there's this new hustle, which is called climate activism. Nobody actually knows what that means. Nobody knows what a climate activist is. What does a climate activist do? What value do they add to the world? I'm trying not to mention names here, but especially in the African context, you know the people that I'm referring to, right? What do you do exactly? I saw one the other day. I was scrolling through Twitter and she was receiving an award for um, what was the award for? For effective sensitization regarding climate issues. I'm thinking to
What the fuck
myself,
does that mean?
what does that mean? That's a whole lot of words strung together in sequence. What does that mean? What does it mean? Does it mean you held a bunch of seminars and workshops, which were obviously funded by donors, and you got to fly around, you fly from Uganda to wherever and, feel important for a day or two? Is that the job? What does it actually mean to be these things? Because I feel like there, especially in Africa, there's a whole there's this thing that I call the NGO industrial complex, right? So I come from Nigeria. The capital city, Abuja, is a place where you can observe the NGO industrial complex in its raw form, right? So there are all sorts of hucksters, there are all sorts of hustlers, there are all sorts of snake oil salespeople who figured out sometime around 2011, they figured out that there's a lot of money to be made by creating this thing called an NGO or a CSO and pitching for funding to these big global funders or to foreign embassies or whatnot, that it's a job, right? I know a person, I'm not going to mention his name, right? He runs a CSO, one of these CSOs in Abuja. This dude drives around in basically the latest vehicles with customized license plates. Like customized license plates. So you're going to see this guy driving around in a Benz or in a Toyota Land Cruiser with customized license plates in Abuja. Donor money.
Damn, give me his job.
Donor money. So then I think to myself, what value are you adding to the world exactly? What productive addition do you make to the Nigerian economy? How do you increase Nigeria's economic productivity and GDP beyond your consumption, which you do because you buy ostentatious stuff? Beyond that, how exactly do you contribute? What are you doing? Because I feel like this thing called climate activism in the African context, I feel like it fits squarely into that category because I've met a lot of these people. And the more I meet them, the more I struggle to answer the question, what the fuck does this person do for a living? I have no idea. What exactly is your job? What do you do? You stand in front of an audience of white people in Nakuru or in Kampala or in Limuru or Nairobi or in Kigali, because it's usually in East Africa that this thing is at its crescendo for some reason. Right? You stand in front of an audience of mostly white people, and you say a lot of buzzwords, right? And then you mix it in with a bunch of stuff that isn't true. You talk about how, so for example, last year there was severe flooding in Nigeria, right? And these people came out in their dozens to say, yes, symptom of climate change and blah blah blah
The
blah.
world is gonna end.
Meanwhile, what caused the flooding? What caused the flooding is that Nigeria has two major rivers, the Niger River, the Benue River. And they have a confluence called Lokoja. Now, the Benue River is downstream of the Nigeria's portion of the Benue River is downstream of Cameroon's portion of the Benue River. Cameroon has a hydroelectric dam called the Lagdo Dam, which dams the Benue River, which they use to generate electricity and for irrigation. Now, when that dam was being constructed in the 70s, there was an environmental impact assessment that was done, and it was determined that whenever there is excess runoff from that dam, it's going to cause flooding in Nigeria. So the agreement was Nigeria would construct a dam of its own on its own side of the border called the Dasin Hausa Dam. Nigeria never constructed it. So basically, every few years, whenever there is higher than, because seasonal rainfall is never the exact same amount every year. Some years it's high, some years it's low. That's normal. Every time there's a bit of high seasonal rainfall, Cameroon has to open the Lagdo Dam to release excess runoff, and there's flooding in Nigeria. That happens roughly once every 10 years. It's a normal geographical phenomenon. The last time it happened was around 2012. There was significant flooding in the Lokoja area. It was well reported. It happened again in 2022. This time around, unlike 2012, there was a whole new group of people called climate activists.
We told you.
Who
You're
have
not listening.
sprung up out of nowhere, and everybody had an opinion. And they're talking about how, Africa is bearing the worst brunt of the world's environmental crisis, and they're pointing to this. And dude, this is an infrastructural issue.
Do they even know what they're talking about?
No, they did not. So I remember I actually had to publicly tackle this thing. I made a video about it, before they shut up eventually, because they had no fucking clue what they were talking about. They just basically look out for anything that looks like any kind of weather, disaster, or anything. And yes, that is an opportunity for this completely undefined thing called climate activism. What does it mean? And more importantly, what does it achieve? Because if you're following the so-called climate summit that took place in Kenya some days back, they were talking about, I think the Kenyan president said something about potentially introducing something called a carbon tax.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, if I were in the US or in Europe, a carbon tax would already be a fucking stupid idea. It'd be a ridiculous idea. In Africa, what on earth do you mean by carbon tax?
Is it that people have to buy electric cars?
So basically, the principle behind the carbon tax is that you have to pay for polluting. So essentially, the more you pollute, the more you pay. And somehow, your money fixes the earth. That's the idea. So, why this is not funny? Why this is there are two major reasons why this is a real issue that Africans should be worried about. The first is this thing that some people refer to as stealth recolonialism. What is that? Now, shortly after this Africa Climate Summit, some company in the UAE, I forget the name, they announced that they had struck a deal with the Liberian government. Under this thing, this carbon tax scheme or carbon credit transfer scheme, it's the same principle, which is that you basically pay for polluting. So we're a company based in the UAE. We do a lot of, smelting or whatever. We pollute. So how we remain in the good books of the government is that we purchase carbon credits, right? And we essentially transfer our pollution to a part of the world which does not pollute. In other words, a part of the world which is poor and does not produce anything. So they struck a deal with the Liberian government that, I forget the exact amount of forest, but apparently they control that part of Liberia now, and basically that place is to remain like a forest reserve. So basically that offsets their pollution. So essentially, what is going to happen is everybody is going to come to sub-Saharan Africa and say, hey guys, you want money, right? Here, take this $2 billion. In return, all this rainforest, whatever it is, all this land that is undeveloped, whatever it is, you can't touch it.
It's ours.
It's ours, basically. Under the guise of protecting the environment. That's number one. The second thing is, when you are making everything subject to this climate concerns of a thing. So, for example, there was a gas pipeline in Uganda that was planned. The purpose of it was to fuel a new power station that was supposed to double Uganda's power generation. Because, as I'm sure you know, a country's technology, industrialization, whatever, is directly proportional to the amount of power that it generates.
Oh yeah.
The more electricity you generate, the richer you are. It's as simple as that. The less electricity you generate, the poorer you are.
No math needed.
Very simple. Uganda wants to increase the amount of power, the output it has. Very simple. There's gas in the region. Very simple. Guess what? It can't get financing. Why? Fossil fuel. Fossil fuel is now bad. So instead, you have to go after this chimera called renewable, whatever that means, right? Because the developed world has not even been able to figure out what the hell renewable energy is, right? They use all the coal and all the gas in the world. They are still trying to get gas from Nigeria. to power Germany and whatever, right? They are using natural gas, they are using coal, and they are telling you you can't use your own hydrocarbons. And instead, you have to use renewables. In other words, we have eaten ours, we are already rich, right? But you are not allowed to eat yours. You must remain poor. And if you don't agree to remain poor, that means you don't like the environment. That means you want to kill our planet. So there's this very toxic mix of dishonesty, insincerity, disingenuousness, economic illiteracy, environmental illiteracy. And why I say environmental illiteracy is one of the myths that has been sold is that this thing called renewable energy is actually renewable. So a Tesla, for example, or a BYD, like those are the world's biggest EV manufacturers, right? What goes into a Tesla? What goes into a BYD? Right. Now, a regular car, an internal combustion engine, a BMW or Peugeot, whatever, Innocent, whatever it is, it's basically the metals which you have to mine. Those cause some sort of environmental impact through the mining. The process of forging the engine block, which you have to do that in a what's it called, in a steel mill, which obviously that's a heavy polluter as well. And then when the vehicle is actually in operation, the emission from the vehicle exhaust, right? That's a regular car, which is bad for the environment. An electric vehicle, which is brilliant for the environment, it has no exhausts, right? You just plug it in.
That's what you should be buying.
Here's the thing. Here's why that's stupid. Two simple reasons why that is the stupidest fucking thing you ever heard. You plug it into the wall to charge it, right? What you have done is that instead of pushing out emission from the exhaust, you have displaced the emission to basically prior in the chain. So basically, instead of the car pushing out emissions directly, it's the power station which runs on gas or on coal that is going to push out extra emission to power that electric outlet that you plug the car into. So have you actually saved any emissions, or you've just pushed it out of sight?
You've just changed.
You've just displaced it. Number one. Number two, and more perniciously, in my opinion, the lithium, the cobalt, the tantalite, all these things that go into those special batteries that those cars use, where do those things come from? The vast majority of them come from a place called the DRC. How are those things mined in the DRC?
Katanga.
Are there environmental considerations where those things are mined? Are there human rights considerations where those things are mined? Because it's African children, preteens, who carry headbands all day. And there's men armed with AK-47s overseeing the whole operation because there's warlords in charge of everything. And the outside world doesn't fucking care because all they need is their resources coming out of there. So it's green. It's green as far as you are concerned in San Francisco. But to us on the continent, it's red because it's African blood that is delivering these things to you. So is African blood green? Is African blood sustainable? Is this renewable? I mean, maybe it is. That was a very dark joke. Let's pretend I didn't say that. But do you get where I'm going with this? So how on earth is that renewable? How is that sustainable? How is that good for the planet? So basically, because they're trying to save carbon emissions into the atmosphere, African kids should basically be the lives of African children should be displaced. That's the fair exchange.
I mean, they haven't had it as hard as Greta.
I mean, enough said. Enough said. Enough said. The only other thing that I'll add to this is something I said on Twitter a while back, that look, the day I'll take the whole renewable energy warrior thing serious is when I see Norway, which maintains some of the world's highest standards of living. Their pensions are among the highest in the world. They have high standard. Everything is subsidized in Norway. They have incredibly high standards of living there. And they have been able to do that because they have a $1.3 trillion sovereign wealth fund, which is built entirely off the back of North Sea crude oil. So the day I see Norway take that $1.3 trillion and use it to fund the development of renewable energy projects across Africa, right? In terms of, you guys cannot burn your hydrocarbons, but we're going to give you technology to, to create power generation, which your hydrocarbons could have done in a sustainable way. And here's our $1.3 trillion we've earned from dirty energy, and we're going to use that to fund it. That's when I'll take it serious. Because as I said, this is Europe being Europe, right? At risk of pissing off some of the people viewing this is white people white peopling. This is the same kind of interaction we've had with them for 500 years, where they're being clever by half. They've eaten theirs, and now they're like, we have to share yours. Or at least you shouldn't eat yours. So Norway, which has built a $1.3 trillion sovereign wealth fund out of crude oil. Saudi Arabia, which has a sovereign wealth fund of God knows how many $1 trillion out of crude oil, and which is one of the tightest allies that the US government has. If those people take that dirty money and spend it on renewable energy development on the continent that needs it the most, then I'll take them serious. If not, they should fuck off.
And it's like in Africa, we have way bigger problems.
Way bigger issues.
Right
way,
now. Like,
way
we can't
bigger
even start
issues.
thinking of it in the first place.
Way bigger issues.
Okay. What is wrong with our leaders? Is it that they don't understand what the hell is going on? Or is it that, this is the only way you can get funding, so guys, you just have to...
I think to a large extent is that many of them don't feel like they really answer to us. Many of them feel that what gives them legitimacy is the people in DC, people in Paris, the people in London, people in Brussels, right? To a lesser extent, the people in Beijing or the people in Moscow. Those are the people who give them legitimacy. Not the people in Kinshasa or in Accra or in Lagos or in Mombasa or it's the people who they feel are the real powers that be. Those are the people that they feel like they're answerable to, not us. So just like how, we saw this, you showed me that video and I didn't know whether to laugh or to cry, where you saw the Kenyan president driving to the climate summit in this thing that looked like a lunchbox. And it's an electric car. And I'm like, oh my goodness, wow. Like, what a unique people we are. Let's just put it that way, But I guess they don't feel like the answer to us. Until Africans themselves decide to make the point very forcefully that you do answer to us, in fact, and we don't have any power without us. Until that happens, we'll continue to see spectacles like this.
And I think that's why I like the work that you're doing, because at least it shows them that, hey, you're actually answerable to us.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, there's at least one person who's going to drag the wig off your head. It's very important.
And in as much as right now you might do, a very risky work, some people, do a very risky work, dig, work 15 hours a day, put it out there, then people read and go like, oh, okay, cool, it's done. I hope that doesn't discourage you from, keeping on doing what you're doing, because we are very unique people.
Unique is one way of putting it. I would be dishonest if I said it doesn't affect me. I don't think about it. That's not true. It does affect me. I do think about it a lot. This morning I had a little rant about it on Twitter where I was like, so there's this thing there's this like a murder or death that happened a few days ago, and everyone is doing a hashtag justice for whatever his name is, and there are a bunch of people jumping in. Oh, David Hundeyin should investigate this. I'm sure he'll get to the bottom of it. And I'm like, okay, so because this guy's a celebrity, now it's important. Because the much bigger issues, which I have investigated and put out, what did you do with that information? Bigger issues like who is behind Boko Haram? How did they get their funding? I showed you this. I showed you names. I showed you funding pipelines. I showed you names of organizations, bank accounts. I showed you the intricate funding infrastructure that makes up terror in Nigeria. What did you do with that information? Fuck all. The person who is now the president, prior to when he ran for president, I gave you an insight into his background. This guy's a drug dealer. This guy's bad news for you. What happened? Did anybody do anything with that information? No. There's all sorts of there high risk stories that I can't think of a Nigerian journalist alive or dead who has attempted. Maybe I can think of Dele Giwa. And he paid for it with his life. He got a letter bomb from the NSO and he died, right? And that was one such story. I've done several. So there's a reason I can't set foot in Nigeria. Right? If I set foot in Nigeria, I am going to die. That's a fact. I will die. Right? And I've done all this and I've made all these sacrifices and I've put all this information and I've made it available for free. Even though my platform is subscription-based, you don't need a subscription to read it. You just pay for a subscription if you like to support my work. It's freely available. Anyone can read it.
Guys, please pay for subscription.
Yeah, and what have you done with that information? Absolutely nothing. So, yes, it does bother me actually. Not so much in a personal sense, not because I feel like, my work is not being valued, but it's more a case of I feel like, what is wrong with Africans?
It's like I'm doing this for you.
Not even that. It's like, what is wrong with Africans? Or what is wrong with Nigerians that you can see this kind of outrage taking place and you are the victim. You've been given this information and your response to it is not outrage. Your response to it is not exasperation. Your response to it is, oh, that's a very nice story. Oh, wow, David has done it again. Wow, well said. Wow, David's the best investigative journalist in Africa. Wow. And it's like, that's not why I'm doing this.
It just becomes a story to them.
Yeah, it's almost like entertainment. That's not why I'm doing this. Like, if I wanted to write, like, crime thrillers or something, I could do that. I used to write fiction once upon a time. I could be a very good fiction writer if I set my mind to it. There's a reason I'm doing journalism. I'm doing, non-fiction, investigative work. There's a reason behind that. It's because the society I can see around me clearly needs it. And, you guys are being given this high quality information and you're being given it for free, basically. And it's like, what are you doing with it? Absolute fuck all. So yeah, it does worry me. Not from the point of view of it being it's bad for my ego or something, but more a case of, are my kids going to grow up in this kind of society, this kind of environment? Because when I was growing up in Nigeria, regardless of how bad I could see things were when we would go to the Kingdom Hall or whatever, I could see how people were suffering. Regardless of all of that, there was always this idea that Nigeria was kind of trending generally in the right direction. The military era was over, democracy had returned, the economy was growing like 5 to 7% per annum. You could see, even though the wealth disparity was still very there, it was still very clear, but you could see people coming out of poverty. It wasn't as fast as you would have liked, but you could see the country generally heading in the right direction. So we all grew up with the idea that the Nigeria we would know in 2040 will be completely unrecognizable to the country we grew up in the 90s. But that's not looking like that's going to be the case now. Remember when Africa Rising used to be a thing? And then I came back in 2013 and then they elected some guy in 2015, and it's just been downhill since then, and the Africa is not rising anymore. Let's just put it that way. And now I'm 33. I'm thinking about, having kids. I'm thinking about, long-term future. And I'm thinking, wow, so by the time I'm 50, I'm going to be dealing with the same problems I was dealing with when I was 15. That's not what I thought my future was going to look like. I didn't think that the Nigeria of the 21st century would be a place where your choices would be either deal with the same bullshit you've always dealt with back home or become an immigrant. I thought there'd be more options. So that's the issue. That's what really worries me in all of this. So it's not really about me. It's more a case of I really wish things would change.
And I mean, you have clearly found your place in the revolution, and you're doing the best that you possibly can. And I think yeah, it must really pain anyone who would want to be part of change, and then you're doing the best that you can, and then you're like, guys, okay, you can take it from here, and then nobody does anything, and they're just looking at you and staring at you.
Yeah, someone told me a few days ago that, oh, why don't you come back and lead protests? Why are you outside the country? Why don't you come back? I'm like, oh, okay.
I guess that's their way of saying thank you.
Nobody needs thanks from anybody. Like, this is not like, I don't consider myself to be a hero or something. Like, nobody asked me to do this. But it's just like, I feel like, look, your own self-preservation should kick in at a point. And like, you should feel existentially threatened at a point. And instead you act like everything is fine. I saw someone put it in a very beautifully descriptive manner this morning. The person said, people who are already dead but afraid to die. And I thought, wow, that is such an accurate description. Because what you have now, is it life? What on earth do you have to lose if you rebel against it? The only thing you have to lose is your chains. But, you have people in chains thinking that they are wearing 15-karat jewelry and they're afraid to lose it. So what am I going to do? I'm not I'm not Malcolm X. I'm not some, firebrand revolutionary. I'm just a journalist. So my job is, that's what I always tell people when they ask me questions like, oh, what should we do next? I'm like, bro, that's not my prerogative. My job is to put out information. If I put out information and then tell you what to do with it, I'm no longer a journalist. I'm a politician. If I become a politician, someday we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Right now, I'm not. So you people need to decide what it is you want to do.
I'm pretty sure that you have lots of stories and lots of them that you haven't put out.
Yeah.
How do you survive with them? Because I don't expect them to be good stories for you.
No, they're not. It's an occupational hazard. Comes with the turf. It's not everything you can put out. It's not everything that has happened that the world can know has happened, especially with regard to your personal life. Like, I have gone through some shit these past few years. I mean, I alluded to it in the outset. I mean, and if you want to get the full story, then buy my next book. That's where the full story is going to be. I don't want to preempt it. I'm contractually prevented from preempting it by my publisher. So, there's legal reasons why I can't even talk about it too much. But
we'll have another conversation when the book is out. But first you have to read it.
Yeah, I have seen a few things. There's a slang we use in Nigeria. We say I've seen shaggy. That means I've seen problems. I've seen things. Right. Even going back as far as 2020, when I first fled Nigeria, I didn't really know what I was doing. I knew I had to leave, and I knew if I didn't leave, something was going to happen to me. Right? Because the circumstances under which the protest ended, and there were a bunch of us who were identified by the state, by the government as ringleaders or whatever. They wanted to teach us a lesson, basically. Some of us had our passports seized. But some people tried to flee the country through the airport, and they were arrested at the airport. They had their passports seized and whatnot. A lot of crazy stuff happened. Most of us were put on a no-fly list. So when I left the country, I actually left by land. Like, I shaved off my beard. I said I was a student at a university in Benin called Hudegbe North American University in Cotonou. I said I was a student there. I shaved off my beard. I still don't know how I wasn't caught, because there was a whole thing that happened oh my goodness. So when you're crossing that border illegally, which is what I did, there's the immigration and customs people have this sort of unofficial arrangement with the bikes, the bodas as you call them, that take you across. And there's a certain amount you have to pay, but it's not fixed, right? This is not written anywhere. So it varies on a daily basis. So I was on this bike and I was going across. Bear in mind, all I was taking with me was just a backpack. I had one change of clothes, 2 of my laptops, all my devices, and my important documents. Basically, everything that proves that I'm David Hundeyin was inside that bag, right? That bag must not be opened under any circumstances. Otherwise, something's going to happen to me. We're crossing the border. The immigration guy stops us, asks for more than what the bike guy was expecting to pay. And because they're both speaking their language, Hausa, which I don't speak, I didn't realize what was happening. Next thing, they start having an argument. And the bike guy is like cursing him, like, why would you say that, blah, 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 that you're spoiling business for me? And I'm like, dude, I'm not complaining. I'll happily pay. And he's like, no, God, no, blah, 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 blah. And then the immigration guy is like, okay, you calm down. And he takes my bag and my heart just sinks. Oh my God. Oh no. Why is this happening to me? And then he takes me to his office and then he tells me I should open my laptop. And I just, once you open up the thing, the Windows 10 thing, David Hundeyin, oh my God. Before, like, I just knew it must never get to that point. So I said, sir, please. And then said, are you ready to cooperate? I said, yes, sir. I gave him 10,000. What he had asked from the cab driver, from the bike guy, was like, I think 3,000 or so, which was more than the agreed sum. I gave him 10. I just take and let me go, for the love of God. That was how I crossed the border. Then I got to Benin, and I took a vehicle I was supposed to go to the Ghanaian border, Aflao. It only got to the Togolese border, which is called Hilakonji, or Sanve Konji on the Togolese side. By the time we got there, the border was past closing time. It was dark already, so there was no way to cross legally. So again, you had to use the back route. There's this. It's like an endurance trek, very, and it's beach sand because Togo is a seaside country. So your feet get bogged down. It's carrying a heavy backpack, and there are mosquitoes assaulting you. Hefty West African mosquitoes that that have a taste for blood, right? And I'm AA genotype, by the way. Apparently we are more delicious to the mosquito. This is scientifically proven. That was a night. Finally, we got to the other side of the Togolese border, and then we got a vehicle going to Afla, the Ghanaian border. And then there was another issue along the way. The police, they call them the gendarme in Togo, stopped us along the way because basically they have a perception that whenever you see a fully loaded vehicle heading toward the Ghanaian border with goods in the back, then it's Nigerians, because it's Nigerian traders who make that, and they know that Nigerian traders will have money. And apparently, what I also didn't know is that Togolese police, if they identify you as a Nigerian, you're already half guilty. What makes you fully guilty is if they find you with a laptop. Apparently, that makes you an internet fraudster, a Yahoo boy. I had 2 laptops. The guy says he wants to search everyone. I don't know how he didn't see those laptops, because he actually did open my bag. I don't know how he didn't see. I think because there was a shirt covering them. If he had just flipped it over, he would have seen both laptops, and I don't know what would have happened to me. I really don't know. But somehow, he just didn't see it. So we got back in the car, got to the Ghanaian border, finally crossed over to Ghana was like safe territory, because basically the Francophones are very hostile. So that's unsafe territory. But when I was in Ghana, because Ghana was like, I spent a lot of my childhood there as well. So I felt like, okay, basically safe now. So from there, there's like a 6-hour road trip to Accra from Aflao. I booked an Airbnb, so that's kind of where the adventure started. I didn't realize how long it was going to be. I don't know what I thought. Maybe it was going to be a few months. Maybe things were going to calm down back home. I don't know what I thought was going to happen. But 1 month became 3, 3 months became 6, 6 months became a year. And during that time, I was still releasing more and more stories. That was when West Africa Weekly actually became a thing, because that was when I got the Substack, the grant from Substack, $30,000. And basically, before I knew it, I had gone from being someone that the state considered to be an irritant to being a full-blown enemy of state. Like full-blown. There was a lot of drama that went on in between. A lot of this is going to be in my book. I ended up in a safe house run by Anas, the Ghanaian journalist, for several months. There was just a lot. It's I look back on it sometimes, and it's like this is barely just 18 months ago, 2 years ago. It feels like this happened 10 years ago, because so much has happened. So much has happened. And writing the book in itself is almost like a cathartic experience. I'm almost like reminding myself that, yeah, this actually happened. I'd almost forgotten that this happened. You know, in the middle of all of this was in February. Was it February or March? February or March 2021, when I was doing my first cross border investigation. I was investigating the story of Nigerian human trafficking in Cote d'Ivoire, and I ended up in Cote d'Ivoire, and there was no way to cross the border legally. So that was when I entered Cote d'Ivoire illegally, and there was a whole. There was a the story is actually on West Africa Weekend. It's gonna be in my book as well. There was just so much. There's a picture which I can't wait for the book to come out because of that picture. The picture is in the story, but in the story it's censored. Right in the book, you see the faces of both of us. We had just crossed, myself and my guide, he's a Nigerian friend, whom incidentally I also fled Nigeria with. Two of us were involved in the protest, right? And there's a picture of us. We've just come across the river in the canoe. If we're on the Ivorian side of the water, on both sides, because we're like at the bottom, we're on the bank. Above us, on both sides, there's like gendarmes. On the Ghanaian side, there's Ghanaian military. They're armed. On the Ivorian side, there's Ivorian gendarme. They're armed. If they see you, they will shoot you. And we're there, hiding in the undergrowth. And I whip out my phone. And I just feel like I have to document this this moment.
Couldn't hold yourself.
Yeah. And I take a picture. So we're wearing our masks. And we put down our masks. And we just both took a picture. That picture is going to be in the book. It's iconic. Like, it's one of those moments where you ask yourself, what sequence of choices did I make in my life that led me to this exact moment? Like, it's one of those times when you actually question yourself. Like, do I actually have sense? Like, am I am I actually a sensible person? Like, am I actually doing the right thing? But I guess it all worked out one way or another.
Do you think your life is gonna be made into a movie one day?
I think that's almost inevitable because purely because I'm already friends with so many movie makers, and technically I am one as well. So if nobody does it, I'll have to. I mean, there are so many things. There's so many pieces of my work that are already being developed. So I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to mention it or not. So I'm not going to mention the name of the story, but there's a story I did last year, which is actually being developed in South Africa right now for a TV miniseries.
Exclusive.
Yeah, so that's probably going to be out early next year. I think Q1 next year is when that should be out. So you'll probably be able to see it on DSTV or whatever.
Oh, so movie, book. Got a lot going on.
Yeah. There's a
And
lot
more
going on.
stories.
There's a lot going on. There's a whole lot going on. So it's not possible to do the kind of work that I've done, and I guess not get a certain amount of attention. I guess there's potentially even collaborations in the offing. I mean, I'm not going to mention names, but if you can think of some of the biggest names in journalism in East and Southern Africa, there's collaborations coming up. So there are things that are in the offing. So I'm a very busy person, which is why I mean, there are many people who have asked to sit down like this. There are not many people that that I've said yes to, but I mean, you are you. So I mean, I wasn't going to say no to you.
Thank you. You're a very busy person, as you just said. Do you have free time? Is there anything you do for fun?
I eat, I sleep. Yeah, I really, that might sound funny to you, but I really, like, those are the pleasures that I have. I really enjoy my sleep and I really enjoy my food. That's it. I mean, probably, number 3 will probably be sex, but it's sleep and food. Those are like my creature comforts. I love those things. Sometimes I play video games as well, but I don't get the same buzz that I used to get.
I'll be right to say those are very simple pleasures of life.
Yeah.
And do you think that's because of the type of childhood you had and how you grew up? And
I think it is because when I was a child, even though obviously I did have a privileged background, but because of the very unique brand of repression that I was raised under, and the fact that for lack of a better term, my mom was a very big bully, right? Till today, we don't have a relationship. So what I used to dream of a lot of the time when I was young was when I get older, I'd literally just have my own place and I'd just be able to sleep all day. and I just feel safe there. I wouldn't be worried that someone is going to burst into my room at any moment, and I'm constantly going to be in trouble for this, that, or the other. Someone is always going to be hitting me. I'm just going to have my space and my peace. So, and it's, I guess some people think it's really weird, but it's a thing that till today, I really enjoy my own company. Like, I can go for weeks without physical contact with another human being. Obviously, I might talk to people on Twitter, we do Zooms, I do a lot of Zooms and all that, but I might go for weeks without physically meeting another person. So, like, during the COVID-19 lockdown, for example, I didn't have it as hard as many other people did. I was used to, I felt like I spent my life preparing for it. Because I mean, you have an idea of how I live. I live almost like in permanent seclusion. I live in isolation by default. That's just how I am. I occasionally take a delivery here and there, and that's it. I'm just on my own. I don't have visitors. The friends I have, I maintain the relationships electronically. We do video calls. That's it. My space, I'm very territorial with my space. So yeah. So yeah, childhood definitely did have some kind of an impact. In fact, earlier this year when I first moved to Edinburgh, one of the first things I did actually was see a therapist. Partly because I was coming out of, just less than a year after a really, really, really bad breakup / divorce. I felt like there were things that I still hadn't sort of sorted out in my head, because that was a really nasty, really nasty breakup. Another human being has never hurt me like that before. So there was a lot that needed to be unpacked, and my therapist actually, it was actually like anyone who can afford it should actually go to therapy. Even if you feel like you don't need it, even if you feel like you're in control, you should still go if you can afford it, because you will discover things about yourself that you probably didn't realize existed. Right? One of the things my therapist made me understand about myself is that the reason why I enjoy my own company so much, I deal with seclusion so easily, is because that's like, it's the inner child in me regaining control. Right? So it's my inner child fulfilling its long-held fantasy of being in control, controlling its own space, and not constantly feeling endangered. Yeah. So, but it's very funny how I was trying to not constantly feel endangered because of one individual, and now I've ended up being endangered by a whole ass government. So that's, I guess, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
David, thank you so much for taking your time and having this conversation and giving us an insight into your life, because I think the first episode we did was more of the work that you've been doing, but this one was more of your personal story.
Yeah.
And I hope people at least understand the life of an investigative journalist. And so if they're considering it, then they know what they're getting themselves into.
Yep.
And I hope people in the Twitter space don't drive you nuts, so you keep on doing what you're doing.
Well, I hope so too. And it's always a pleasure to speak to you. That's, as you said, after the book is out, hopefully in January, we might do this again, hopefully. So yeah, let's do it.
Absolutely.